Now, there hasn't been a video requested this much on the channel as much as this. Homestuck. I know absolutely nothing about it besides the fact that Toby Fox has some association by living with the creator for a bit and being a fan of the work, and the fact that Dante Brasco is a bit of a voice actor in it. That is all I know about Homestuck, and today we're going to be watching a Sarah Z video explaining what the heck Homestuck's all about. If you enjoy this content, please be a hero, like, comment, and subscribe. Like Aunt May said,
I believe there's a hero in all of us.
so if you enjoy this content and you want to see my silly adventure of becoming a YouTuber of what, who knows what, then please stick around and let's get into this. Make sure to show some love to the original content creator and grab something to stay hydrated throughout the video. I got some water. Sit back, relax, and let's get into this bad boy and discovering what the heck Homestuck is. Swoosh.
A
Okie
woman
dokie.
sits alone in her room.
Ooh.
It just so happens that today, the 13th of April, is the
13th
day
of
she has set
April.
aside to analyze one of her old fandoms. Though she has been reviewing and critiquing fandoms for years now, it is only today that she shall be given a name. What will the name of this young woman be? So, exactly
Okie
12
dokie.
years ago
12
on this
years
day,
ago.
we saw the beginning of a silly, serialized webcomic that would become a global phenomenon. From massive cosplay groups to convention horror stories about Sharpie baths to thousands of art pieces.
What's a Sharpie bath and do I wanna know? I'm kind okay.
Animatics, fanfiction, and more to millions of dollars
Wow.
raised for a game, Homestuck quickly turned from a simple Microsoft Paint project to a gigantic
Oh, it
fandom
started
with a
on
population
Microsoft
nearly
Paint? Holy
equal to my
shit.
entire country.
Dude.
There aren't quite as many Homestuck fans as there are Canadians, but I would easily believe a Homestuck nation could conceivably exist. The other Sarah Zed even did a Homestuck video before me.
So from my experience of Homestuck fans, I mean I only know one IRL, or knew one IRL, but they are weird and wonderful people, you know, with big vocabulary because I barely know English, you know, it's my first and only language and I barely know it. Whereas my Homestuck, whenever I talk to people that read Homestuck, they be dropping the most crazy words on me and I have to pull out Google and look it up. Homestuck, that's all I know about it, is a bunch of weird and wonderful people, and every time I ask, should I get into it? They say, ooh, it's a lot, buddy. You know, it's, they don't, yeah, so this is where I'm starting, and hopefully you find out
Though
what
there's
the heck
lots
it's
of fan
about.
involvement here. At its height, the fandom was a lot of things. Zealous, expansive, and perhaps most importantly, deeply confusing and terrifying, both to those
Wow.
involved in it and those watching from the sidelines with
Okay.
only a vague idea of what the hell was happening in it. Nowadays, it's kind of still going, and it's kind
it's
of not
still-
in a
okay.
confusing way, which is perfectly on brand for what Homestuck is, to be fair. But in a lot of ways, the community and the way it was engaged with is kind of a ghost town. And I don't mean in the Homestuck sprite way. Looking through the fandom now, it very much gives...
Is it one creator of it, and it's a lot of AU content, like peep fan created content? I literally, I have no nothing. Is it a web novel? Is it a comic? Is it? So I think it's a novel. Like, I don't know. I literally have no. I don't know. I literally have no idea what Homestuck is.
gives me the same energy as visiting a town that used to be huge and bustling and now it's dried up, leaving behind not nothing, like it's still there,
There's
but
remnants?
it's just
Okay.
a little empty and a little bitter and a little bit in denial.
Oh.
It's so fascinating to me. Like, how does this massive, incredible, slightly terrifying fandom turn into this? Well, to answer that, we need to look at Homestuck, the whole thing, the entire 800,000 plus word thing, and the entire decade plus
800,000
history
words.
of the Homestuck fandom. So, what was Homestuck? Why did it appeal to
gosh.
literally millions of people? Why was the fandom so famously terrifying? And what happened to turn it into what it is now? Let's find out.
That's a good hook. He's good at this. The beginning. Let's get into this bad
As
boy.
far as massive media projects go, Homestuck had pretty humble beginnings. For the vast majority of its history, it was created primarily by this one guy, Andrew Hussey. It began
Andrew
as
Hussey.
a mixed media project that was a partially interactive webcomic that incorporated stuff like flash animations, music, and GIFs. The sort of branding of it, especially at the beginning, is that it looks like you're playing a video game with video game dialogue options, chat logs
Okay.
between friends, and interactive elements to click.
John.
At the very beginning, there was also a forum where directions the plot went were determined by forum responses. The forum wasn't started for Homestuck, it was called Microsoft Paint Adventure, or MSPA for short, and was actually initially created by Andrew Hussey in 2006 to host an interactive forum game called, well, MS Paint Adventure. It later got renamed to Jailbreak. The drawings are pretty crude, like very 2006, and it was a pretty weird story that incorporated forum suggestions and in some ways served as the blueprint for
Happened to the guy with glasses.
Hussey made a few other little comic/game creations on MSPA over the couple of years leading up to Homestuck. None of the aforementioned stories got the same hype that Homestuck did, but they're still relevant and often intertwined with it. They were often kind of fun, surreal, interactive stories, often drawn in simple art styles with little nods referencing each other. There were
Now, I may not look like it. I'm pretty young, okay? I get gunk claims all the time, but I'm only 24, you know? And don't say damn like that, okay? 24 is. I feel like the beginning of the internet, like when it's like from like 2005 onward, like 2015, must have been just this like fever dream of people trying to create all sorts of different type of content and seeing new forms of content that like, it must have been a really like, I don't want to say remarkable time because I feel like there was a lot of bad that happened in that time as well, but a really interesting time of just people being creative and stuff like that. I'll be honest, a lot of the stuff created today is kind of oversaturated or like, I don't want to discredit a lot of people, but there's a lot of not unique stuff. I mean, you've got the introduction of AI and stuff like that, which we despise. We're anti-AI over here. Sorry if you're an AI fan. But I don't know. I feel like this is like, it must have been so exciting to learn this like brand new form of like way of taking content. And this Microsoft Paint Adventure must have been like, I don't know, I don't want to say, I feel like innovative is the right word to use. It might be glazing Andrew too much, but it seems pretty innovative and fun.
3 of these before Homestuck. There's the aforementioned Jailbreak, there's Bard Quest, which never got finished, there's a story called Problem Sleuth that starts out as a more detective story and later actually gets incorporated into Homestuck, and then finally, there's Homestuck. Much like its MSPA predecessors, Homestuck initially utilizes a pretty simple art style and video game dialogue, and again, much like its predecessors, it starts out as an interactive story that incorporates the forums into its narrative. So, like, for example, the first main character we get introduced to is named John, and that name was picked by someone on the forums. John was the first option proposed, and a couple moments later, someone commented suggesting the name Clint Newton for the main character. Hussey, seeing John first, went with John. But the protagonist of Homestuck was literally seconds away from being called Clint Newton. Same goes for the other protagonists we meet. Stuff like their names were determined largely by—
I don't trust Clint's ever since Stardew Valley. I don't know. I really hate Clint in Stardew. I mean, okay. I think Clint's overly hated. I just dislike him a little bit. So I don't trust the Clints of the world besides Clint Steven. Also, if you're watching this far into the video, I'm assuming you're joining me for this journey, so thank you so much for that. And let me know if you are down in the comments below by commenting "I hate Clint" in your comment. That just lets me know that you're sticking around for this, and thank you so much. Also, make sure to stay hydrated and take care of yourself.
By random people on the forums. All these stories got a moderate amount of popularity online, but Homestuck was the first to really blow up. So much that less than a year into its making, Hussey had to actually stop taking forum suggestions just because there were so many of them and the narrative was getting more and more complex, and it just wasn't feasible or compatible with his vision for the story anymore. So in many ways, this was not only his most popular story to date, but also his most, well, solo story. So what is Homestuck actually about? That's a complicated question, mostly just because the story is very convoluted and surreal and features lots of stuff like time travel and alternate worlds and timelines, and so much happens in it, and it's nearly a million words, not to mention art and music and animation and stuff, but fundamentally, to sum up the meat of the story in an accessible way, it's about a bunch of kids who accidentally ended the world and are trying to create a new one. There's no way this video is going to manage to sum up every single detail of what happened in Homestuck in a way that's accessible to everyone while still being interesting, so forgive me for this being necessarily somewhat incomplete. But, okay. So we open on John Egbert, almost Clint Newton, a 13-year-old kid hanging out in his room. We get to know him and learn that he's a nice, dorky kid who's friends with cynical nerd Rose Lalonde, aspiring cool kid with some deeper issues to work out Dave Strider, and heart of the group Jade Harley. The kids accidentally end the world by playing the beta copy of a video.
If you, which one you resonate with most. If you're a Homestuck fan I would love to know which one you resonate with most, and by the end of this video, which one do you think I am most like? I'm curious your thoughts.
Game called Spurb,
Okay.
and they have to finish the game to make a
Spurred.
new world. The early parts of Homestuck are interesting. Some people really love them, and some people really hate them, and some people are a mix of both. I know a lot of people who have really tried to get into Homestuck, but the beginning of the story just drove them off for some reason or another.
Okay.
It really just captures the feeling of fucking around in a new video game. Just trying out a bunch of things and seeing what works, combining different things together, picking stuff up and putting it down again, testing your limits, all of that. Some of it also takes place in the dream world, so you get all this surrealism and exploration. As a result, a lot of early Homestuck is kind of just that. It's a mix of programming humor and confusing world building, and reading it, you can really see why some people love it and why some people either just don't get it or just don't like it. The story also contains a lot of interludes and references to side characters, including characters from Problem Sleuth, and it's often hard to see the plot connection right away.
So, my question is, so it starts off as this like flash game. I don't know if flash game's the right term. I'm not a programming guy, I'll be honest. But it starts off as a game where you interact and then it's connected to a forum and then it becomes a story.
Reminds me a lot of trying to read Worm, another insanely long web serial where there are lots of little interludes between chapters, some of which got added after the fact. Sometimes it feels like they enhance the world and deepen our understanding of existing characters, and sometimes you're like, oh my god, please, this is already long enough, I want to get to the plot now. Homestuck is told using the act structure.
I really want to know
what
what they're
the story was like for its first 4 acts. It's a lot of us getting to know our main characters, seeing them explore these worlds without a ton happening to them, and seeing these interludes that deepen our understanding of what the world of Homestuck is like, often featuring side characters and references to other MSPA games. The first 4 acts spanned about a year of real life time as Homestuck slowly accumulated a bigger and bigger fandom. I can't find exact numbers of how many people read Homestuck during its first year, but a simple Google Trends search shows it really rising in the second quarter of 2010, and we'll soon see it growing exponentially beyond that. Because after Act 4 and after a recap interlude, Homestuck started its 5th act in mid-2010. And this is really where, much like Earth, the story and the fandom blew the fuck up.
Wow. I said it picks up. That was the PG term.
So let's say you're someone who has never seen Homestuck before, never read it, know nothing about its plot, or only vaguely tangentially aware of it. All of this so far might be completely meaningless to you, entirely fresh new information.
Okie dokie.
Now I want to show you a picture of these things. Chances are your mind lit up in some form of recognition. You've seen these. Even if you think you haven't, you absolutely have. Maybe you've seen fan art on your Tumblr dash, maybe you've seen someone cosplay them at a convention, but you've seen them and you can't unsee it. These are trolls, and they're about to blow everything the fuck up. So it's worth mentioning that while the first 4 acts of Homestuck focused almost entirely—
Okay, I'm gonna set like a crazy target. If we hit 1,000 likes, I will cosplay a troll for a video. If you want to see that, make sure to like
on our 4 beta kid protagonists. Starting in Act 3, they were contacted by these mostly off-screen, mysterious, gray-skinned kids known as trolls. They didn't play the most important role in the plot, mainly seeming to exist just to troll the main characters. But they certainly were there, and there certainly was a lot of mystery around who they were and what they were up to. And then Act 5 started. So after the explosive Act 4 finale, which involved this long, elaborate flash animation, the longest yet for this series, the story decides to pick up not by exploring any of the massive plot threads it left off on, but instead by taking us to another part of Homestuck's world. This is Alternia, where the entirety of Homestuck Act 5, Act 1, called Hivebend in Universe, will take place. By the way, I know that sentence was weird to parse, Act 5, Act 1. That's seriously how they name this stuff. In the later acts, you literally get shit like Act 6, Act 4, Act 1, so apologies for that in advance. The story shifts to focus entirely on 12 brand new alien kids whose alien species—
Wait, they kind of look awesome. I'm trying to think which one's my favorite. I mean, it's based on star signs, right? I'm seeing star signs, I believe. I'm a Cancer, which I believe is the top left one, which my face cam's conveniently blocking off, my bad. But it's like the main one that's been seen so far.
is literally named trolls. Yes, their name is a pun based on the fact that they're internet trolls who are playing their own game of Spurb. On the surface, it seems
This
more of the
guy,
same, just
I
with a
think it's
new
a guy,
cast,
yeah.
but in reality, this was a drastic turning point for where Homestuck was going
Why do
to
I
go.
why do I see the movie poster for Hitch? I love Hitch. Wait a second. Why is Hitch in Homestuck?
Homestuck up until this point was still
Okay.
good, but very different than what it would
Sorry.
eventually be known
Oh,
for.
God.
It was a lot looser, its plots were more jumbled and all over the place. It had characters and an ensemble, sure, but they weren't so much the focus of the story. They were more like tools that could be used to get to the wackier and zanier and over-the-top story elements. Act 5 changed this. Homestuck was still fun and goofy, yes, but it found itself now focusing more on character relationships and interpersonal drama. Rather than the plot moving the characters, it was now the characters moving the plot.
Okay.
But focusing on a relatively simpler, more self-contained story wasn't the real reason why this part of the series took off. I mean, Homestuck's intermission focused on a seemingly unrelated story about a gang called the Midnight Crew, and it worked so well that readers regularly have to ask whether or not they can skip the first intermission. But Act 5 had a secret ingredient to success with the trolls. On first glance, the popularity of the trolls can seem a bit strange. What is it about these guys that made them stand out so much against the rest of Homestuck, or just in general? But what it really comes down to is this. The trolls are perfectly designed to be appealing, and I mean that with no sense of irony. They're all introduced with very simple and exaggerated personality traits, which makes them easy to understand
one with the
and
cape
latch
looks
onto.
awesome,
This
by
one
the
is
way.
angry, this one is shy, this one has never done anything wrong. If you didn't like one of these characters, chances are you could find one that you thought was amusing, or that you related to, or just enjoyed seeing. They also all...
I strongly believe the person's video, they make a really phenomenal point of the reason that Homestuck blew up is that it went from characters to push a story or plot to a plot and story to push characters. I think that's how you really capture. I mean, people. The power with stories is through the relationship and the connection you build with the story, and a strong way to do that is with people and characters. I mean, that's people are attracted to people at the end of the day. That's what humans are. And like, I think a great example, I love D&D. I think D&D as a whole is really interesting, and it's something I want to get into more. But Vox Machina, for example, is a D&D animated series, which is a perfect example of that. Yes, there's plots and stuff that like is throughout the seasons, but what really drives that and makes you relate to characters most is your relationship you build with the characters, the relationship between the characters, and there's a character for everyone, different styles, and I think Undertale and Deltarune, for example, has that as well. It's what makes great series stick and really just make you fall in love with it. And it seems like this is what Homestuck
have
did.
very striking character designs with simple but
bit of
immediately
random
iconic
tangent.
traits. Gray skin, orange horns, and black Zodiac t-shirt. There were a couple variations on that, like Catgirl or Fish or Juggalo, but these were the consistent traits among all 12 of the Act 5 trolls. The simplicity and uniformity of these traits meant that it was easy for fans to replicate for their own fan creations, and there were tons of fan creations. If we've learned anything from Kingdom Hearts, it's that introducing about a dozen cool characters with a lot of angst and inner drama is a surefire way to ignite a fandom. So for troll cosplay, all you needed were some horns, an official t-shirt, and either gray face paint or a bathtub and some Sharpies, and you were good to go. But there was...
What is this bathtub Sharpie reference? I keep seeing am I gonna learn in this video? Should I look up? I don't know.
Also the more interesting creation of the troll sona, or fan troll. Because trolls had such extensive lore behind them and such uniform traits,
love a
it
troll
was super
sona.
appealing to just make your own troll, with all the troll rules and styles and everything like that. Plus, because the basic troll design was already so iconic and unified, it was really hard to make a bad troll sona. So long as you followed the basic guidelines, you couldn't really make a bad looking OC. I don't think I've ever seen a bad troll sona. And this is a dare, send me your troll sona art and I will tell you that it's good.
I would love to see your troll sona art. Please join the Discord. If I'd love to just yap with you in general. Got a nice little community going over there and a bunch of awesome people. But please do send. I love seeing your artwork. It's one of my favorite things about the Discord, to be honest. So I'd love to see if you have any troll sonas or any Homestuck or other artwork you'd like to show off.
It felt like everyone in the fandom had one. And maybe I'm biased because both me and my co-writer Emily had our own troll sonas with designs and lore and everything. There were sites where you would take a personality quiz and then it would name your fan troll and make all the stats based on your answers. And I would go onto this designated website, MSPARP, that was like Omegle, but for role-playing as your troll Sona and everything, and it was certainly a time. Act 5, Act 1 of Homestuck might have been slightly controversial with Homestuck's originating fan base, but it was hugely popular with bringing in a new crowd of people. As these fan creations got spread around, it would raise a lot of questions about what the fuck a troll was and where were they from. And this would cause a bit of a rift in the community from those who believed you should or could start reading Homestuck at Act 5 so that you could immediately get to the trolls, and those who were more purists and insisted that you needed to read from the very beginning in order to appreciate the story and characters. It was essentially the Homestuck equivalent of Doctor Who fans yelling "Don't skip 9" at you. After about 3 months, Act 5, Act 1 was over, and Homestuck moved into Act 5, Act 2. The story...
With Doctor Who, I started from the 9th Doctor. I don't know if there's many Doctor Who fans watching this, but my favorite Doctor is the 11th. I'd love to know your favorite Doctor and why. There's a lot of great arguments for a few of them.
We went from being solely focused on the trolls to being very much focused on the trolls, but also everyone else is here too. There was finally follow-up to the end of Act 4. The original beta kids got to interact more with the trolls. There were a lot of character deaths, like a lot of character deaths. And it was all very, very dramatic. Generally speaking,
but are they, like,
this feels like the era of Homestuck that people most fondly look back on. That's not to say that people consider this part of the series perfect, but generally speaking, when people think about Homestuck, they think a lot about the stuff in Act 5, Act 2, for better or for worse. In a lot of respects, it's the least divisive section of Homestuck. This all culminated in the end of Act 5, Act 2 animation known simply as S Cascade. It's a 12-minute animated epic featuring 4 different musical pieces and 7 different parts, and it's tying everything together, and it's so grand and cool and badass, and the soundtrack slaps, and it's just great. There was a lot of hype for this, and it very much delivered. And I'm not
Homestuck leitmotifs.
The release of Cascade drew so many clicks that it shut down Newgrounds, the site it was hosted on, and then it crashed the MSPA website, and then they uploaded it to Mega Upload, where it crashed that site too. Everybody wanted to see this thing. Cascade was a big point in the fandom, and in a lot of respects, represents Homestuck at its most popular, most relevant, and most revered. It serves as the end of Homestuck's golden age and the end of Act 5. From this point on, Homestuck is gonna get a lot more divisive and a lot more. So what was the Homestuck fandom like at its height? God, it was a lot of things. It was big, it was bizarre, it was sometimes terrifying, it was a lot.
The Midnight Crew.
A couple weeks ago, I asked people on Twitter to tell me about their favorite memories of the Homestuck fandom, good or bad. At that point, it wasn't really for hashtag content so much as just getting a feel for things, but there were so many interesting answers there. Not all of them can feature in this video because, Jesus Christ, it's already long enough, but one of the main things people highlighted was the fan creativity, and there really was a lot of it, especially in the early days. And not all of it was good because there was a large volume of it, and a lot of it was
I'm gonna ask a really divisive question. I don't know if divisive is the right word. If you were a fan of both Homestuck and Undertale / Deltarune, which community... Oh, I see some Homestuck, Undertale art. Which community would you say is more creative? And I don't mean that to put one another down. It's just the fact that for one of my favorite... I think my favorite thing about the Undertale and Deltarune community is how creative they are. I mean, my IG Reels is just filled with art of just... Deltarune at the moment. I mean, it's something that I admire. I think it's most admirable about the community as a whole. I mean, there's a lot of bad about it, I mean, with every community, but is Homestuck to that degree, or similar, or more?
But there were so many amazing, impressive prints, and a lot of animatics.
So far, it seems to that degree,
so
though.
Lots of fandoms did this, but Homestuck was one of the really big ones to do it back in the day. 2012 was really the height of it. You'd have these animated, hand-drawn videos set to different songs.
I was not doing much in 2012.
Them, and it's at the point where certain songs are just permanently associated with Homestuck in the minds of millions of people because of these projects. Like, you know how if a song was in Shrek, it's a Shrek song forever?
Yeah.
A lot of songs are just Homestuck songs forever now to a whole generation of people. Girl with One Eye by Florence and the Machine is a Homestuck song forever because of this animation with 1.5 million views. Matchbox 20's Let's See How Far We've Come is a Homestuck song because of its several animatics. Blue Lips by Regina Spektor, Homestuck song. Some of these got up to 6.5 million views, and that's just the animatics of established songs. Possibly the most iconic one that people remember is actually a song parody of We Didn't Start the Fire called You Can't Fight the Homestuck, which came out on July 1st, 2012 with 4.5 million views. Despite coming out just short of a decade ago, I have a strong feeling a large chunk of people watching this video can probably recite it from memory.
Wow. So one thing I've gathered, I've seen it twice now. Is there just like random pieces of media, like the Hitch poster or like Nick Cage in Homestuck, just to like, just for the laugh? Like, how much real life media and content is in Homestuck, if that makes sense?
It was passed around Tumblr a whole lot, and if you look at the comments, people are still coming back to it fairly often with this feeling of nostalgia. One really big thing with this fandom was just this real sense of collectiveness. Just the hype and the idea that this fandom was one big family was huge, at least at the start.
Wow.
And don't worry, I'm not going to pretend that everything was actually peachy in this fandom. Speaking of peachy, more on that in a sec. Suffice it to say, there was criticism and problems and discourse and fights and all that. But there was also just this collective atmosphere of pride in being this weird, giant fandom. One thing was just the level of excitement people felt whenever the comic updated. If you remember that Homestuck cop story from a couple videos ago where someone made up a fake story about reading Homestuck with a cop after it updated, it was clearly cringy and fake, but one thing it got right was that Homestuck updating was a big deal. The comic would update and people on Tumblr and forums would immediately announce a new chapter, everyone clicking to react to the new stuff at the same time.
That sounds similar to like Deltarune is Tomorrow, like type of hyper community. I mean, I'm gonna make a lot of comparisons to Undertale and Deltarune to Homestuck. It's like the only piece of media that I'm familiar with that's similar to it. But hopefully that doesn't piss people off. It's just what I know. But I'm here to learn. You know, this channel is very vague in what it is. It's going to be a bit of everything. I just like learning new things and trying to like integrate in new communities and make new friends. And this is what I'm hoping to do with Homestuck, you know?
The hype of new updates
laugh my ass off. The loudest laugh.
Possibly my favorite memory of this was this blog called MSPA Profit. It was this pretty small Tumblr blog that, without fail, would announce a day or so earlier when the comic was going to update and how many pages the update was going to be. They used to just cryptically post, "Update is coming," and they were always right. Which is weird as hell, right? Because Hussey didn't usually announce when updates were going to happen. They just happened. There were exceptions, of course, like for when the comic had gone on hiatus for a while and it coming back was a big deal. But updates often kinda came out of nowhere. But without fail, this one blog would always know beforehand. I remember there were all these theories about how they knew. Lots of posts speculated that the blog was somehow run by Andrew Hussey himself. Back in 2017, they actually revealed how they did it, and it's some super interesting stuff. Basically, they accidentally stumbled across this weird hidden back-end forum that Hussey used to use to post the comics. They couldn't see what was in them, but the number of posts on the forum was public, and they very quickly realized the number of forum posts corresponded to the number of pages of Homestuck. So they just checked the hidden forum every few hours and counted the difference in posts each time they checked, and that was how many new pages each update would be. It's such a weird roundabout way to upload pages onto a comic, and the fact that this seems to be how Andrew Hussey did it, and that someone figured this out, is just so quintessentially Homestuck. Another big thing in the fandom was just how certain memes almost thrived in their weirdness and their inability to be understood to outsiders, to the extent where if you weren't a Homestuck fan and you saw half the shit they were posting about or laughing about, it was probably utterly incomprehensible. My favorite example of this is this post about how Homestuck is a metaphor for the Obama administration. Just everything about it is great, especially Vriska. I think about this post so much, I love it. Sometimes these jokes got old pretty quickly, sometimes they stuck around for ages. Like, one thing in the fandom was this joke about buckets. Basically, Homestuck trolls reproduce in a way that involves buckets, so whenever a troll character sees a bucket, they get really embarrassed because it's seen as a not safe for work thing in their culture, like how condoms would be.
I have questions.
So there was this whole meme in the Homestuck fandom about how if anyone saw a bucket, they'd act like a Homestuck troll and make a big thing out of it. Or the soft drink Faygo features a lot in the comic, especially in its early years, so Homestuck fans drinking Faygo at conventions would be a big thing. Stuff like that. Speaking of Homestuck fans at conventions, one of the main reasons the Homestuck fandom was infamous is how they were at cons. And I mean the good and the bad. So basically,
I feel
every
like it's a
convention
mixture
from
of the
like
two.
2011 to, well, when the plague struck and conventions stopped existing, was famous for having Homestuck fans attend them in droves. Remember how I said that the trolls were so appealing, partly because they were really easy to draw and cosplay? Yeah, you'd see trolls wandering the convention grounds en masse at pretty much every con ever, especially anime conventions. Some trolls were more popular than others. Characters like Tavros or Pfeffery usually didn't get that much love, but if you were at a convention in 2012, you probably saw at least one of every character.
Holy shit.
Cosplaying at conventions was this
That's a lot.
massive unifying thing for so many fans, especially awkward teenagers using Homestuck for this huge sense of community. Lots of fans would go to conventions alone and very easily be able to identify
That's
who
pretty
their
sick,
people
though.
were because of some horns and gray face paint. It was like a built-in friend group at a lot of conventions. Giant group pictures of Homestuck cosplayers were super common. You'd meet big groups of people and goof off and drink Faygo and be loud and have, you know,
What is
theater
Faygo?
kid at 11 p.m. at Denny's energy.
what
And it was
Faygo is.
wild and fun and memorable, and there were lots of great memories associated. At least for the fans.
Okay.
Outside the fandom, Homestuck cosplayers didn't have the best reputation for a few reasons. Part of it is that if you're a theater kid, hanging out with your theater friends at Denny's after a show is a time-honored rite of passage. If you're a Denny's server or another patron, though, you probably hate the theater kids. Homestuck cosplayers quickly had a reputation of being loud,
What is
pushy,
Sharpie
or just
Bath?
overall obnoxious at these cons. The
Guys, I keep seeing Sharpie Bath. Okay. One thing I will say is I love theater kids. I wouldn't, I mean, I was a drama kid a little bit. I kind of was also a bit too shy to, like, a bit awkward. So I was in like a middle ground of theater kid, let's say. But I think I have a lot of respect for people who are unapologetically themselves. And cringe in public. But I think to be cringe is to be free. I think that's a saying that I really believe to be true. If you are not harming anyone, you're not bringing an I don't know if annoyance, because people get annoyed about good things, you know. If you're doing ultimately good and you're being a good person, be cringe, live your life. I think a lot of, let's say, like, if you go to an anime convention, you're cosplaying like Dragon Ball Z, like Goku or something. That audience might find theater kids more. I mean, I'm sure it's theater kid Dragon fans, but that doesn't. It might find Homestuck fans or Undertale fans more like cringy or annoying. But like, you're not hurting anyone, you know. I think now people are a lot more like. Inclusive. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of people who aren't, but as a whole, I think we've gotten a little better. But back in the day, I can surely imagine that, like, if you were a Homestuck fan, you were called many bad words and seen as just like just like a loser per se. But I don't think you are a loser. I think I don't know. It's a weird one, you know.
To tell every
Hopefully you get
person
my
they
point
met
a
about
little bit.
Homestuck, that they didn't really have an appropriate
I
set
know
of
what my point
boundaries,
is, though,
that they
but-
were mostly 15 and annoying, and so particularly older cosplayers perceived them as unlikable and immature. And obviously that's not to say that every Homestuck cosplayer was actually like this, hashtag not all Homestucks, but rather because the fandom was so big and skewed pretty young, a lot of people had a negative perception of them, whether it be from personal bad experiences, finding them annoying, or just hearing about bad experiences from others.
Yeah.
Lots of people, both inside and outside the fandom, have horror stories of obnoxious Homestuck con kids being rude to them, or being overly pushy, or just ruining the experience for other people. One time, a bunch of them spat into a bucket at a restaurant just because it's on video. No, I will not make you watch footage of that. Some of this is also just the fact that there were so many of them, especially at anime cons. Homestuck, despite a lot of fandom memes, is not actually an anime, so classic anime fans often got really irritated with like 70% of the attendees being Homestuck cosplayers. It was seen as basically encroaching on their space. And this isn't even mentioning the main problem people had with the
that a
Homestuck
little bit,
cosplayers,
but-
the face paint. I remember the first and only only time I did a Homestuck cosplay, which was of a character I will tell you about in a second who did nothing wrong, I went to the local hobby shop and I bought a thing of gray face paint. And the lady who worked at the store just stared at me with this recognition that I couldn't handle. She just stared into my soul. She didn't say anything, but she knew. Perfect example of the mortifying ordeal of being known. But okay, Homestuck trolls are gray. If you're going to cosplay a Homestuck troll, unless you're doing like the human version, you need gray paint, which means cons were overrun with a lot of first-time cosplayers who were painting their entire bodies. This is a problem because a lot of these people did not know how you were supposed to handle body paint. Basically, you need to seal it with some kind of spray or powder, or it will wear off on everything. Everything. Hotel employees had horror stories of entire hotel rooms covered in worn off gray body paint. If Homestuck fans were ever overly physically touchy, they would get their paint on everything and everyone. And most infamously, there's the horrific con story from Anime Expo 2012 of the Sharpie incident. Basically, a Homestuck cosplayer allegedly got into a bath at a hotel and in an attempt to dye herself gray with minimal effort, bathed with vodka and Sharpie dye. She's in the bathtub for 2 hours while the people around her get increasingly suspicious and concerned. Finally, they come into the room. According to the story,
the bathtub is filled almost halfway with, well, what we later found out was 70% alcohol and Sharpie dye. Bottles and Sharpies are just everywhere. It's all over the walls, on the tile, on almost all the towels, and on several articles of clothing and bags in the bathroom.
There are no pictures of this infamous incident, and at this point it's more legend than fact.
Okay.
But Kennedy, who read that line, apparently knows someone who was there, and I would trust Kennedy with my life, so I believe it. Even the mere fact that this became Homestuck legend is very telling of how fans were perceived by a lot of non-Homestuck people. Basically, they were seen...
Any doctors or like medical dermatologists, the skin people? What does... That's gotta have really bad effects on your body, right?
As the theater kids of fandom, for good and for bad. The height of Homestuck's fandom also wasn't stranger to a lot of controversies. Beyond just controversies about the fans themselves, the comic itself had quite a few of its own. There are so many that mostly boil down to thinking that elements of the story were offensive and poorly handled, and I don't have the time to list every single problem that the comic had. Suffice it to say, it was a problematic fave. But a few got really big. One of these was the Caucasian incident. Basically, the kids in Homestuck don't have canon ethnicities. Their faces are drawn in a cartoony style, they're not colored in, and so how to interpret these characters is up to fans. There are some kind of popular fan interpretations of this, like Jade is very commonly drawn with dark skin, Dave is almost always drawn as white, but nothing is technically canon.
I kind of like the fact that their ethnicity is vague. Like, a problem I have per se is that, like, I grew up, I'm like born and raised in London, and a lot of characters that I love in media and stuff are white. So, like, I don't really have a lot of stuff that I can see myself in. Whereas if you leave a character ambiguous, like, for example, one of my favorite characters of all time is Superman. I think I really try and embody that mindset and lifestyle in my day-to-day, as corny as that is. Whereas, like, the idea of, like, me seeing myself in that role is, like, I struggle a little bit because of the skin. Like, you know, I don't see a brown guy. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not letting that stop me. And as the older you get, the more, like, you realize that you can do that anyway. But as a kid, I feel like or as like a young teen, I feel like it's really important is to be able to see yourself in the characters that you love, both like on the inside, but I think on the outside it's nice to have that representation. So that's why I like it ambiguous personally, but I could see why people have some problems with it. I don't know. I feel like you shouldn't have a problem with it, but people might, because people are people at the end of the day. I don't know. I'd love to know what you think. Would you like to see more characters that are just ethnically ambiguous? Like, it could be anything?
But the thing with that is that there was a pretty vocal audience of people who would get really, really mad if you suggested that some of these characters were anything other than white. If you drew certain characters as black or just dark-skinned in general, a lot of people would get really, really mad, which made some fan atmospheres pretty hostile.
That's why I'm kind of scared of cosplaying characters, to be honest. Like, if fans would draw
John is not white, you'd have people get mad and link you to some early panel where baby John is described as pink, or if they drew Rose as black, people would get mad because she has blonde hair, just shit like that. That specifically was a really shitty atmosphere in a lot of ways, and to be honest, Hussey could have done a better job if the intention was actually to depict them as aracial. Stuff like the line describing the character as pink did definitely seem like the author was just thinking of them as white people when writing it. But still, this freedom allowed for fans to interpret these characters as people of color, and a lot of folks were really shitty and racist to fans who did this. So with that as the context, there was this part of Homestuck in Act 6 where the characters were in something called trickster mode. Basically, it's this weird state of the world where everything was colored brightly, it all looked like something out of Candyland, and in particular, there's a panel where a character who had previously been depicted as aracial was explicitly described as Caucasian. This line was apparently meant to poke fun at these fights and to poke fun at racist fans, but who knows. Very quickly, this caused controversy, some people getting mad at Hussey for it, lots of people using it as proof to be like, see, I told you they were white, now you can't draw them as not white anymore, just lots of shit like that. Hussey ended up actually having to change the word Caucasian in this page to the word peachy. This was apparently in response to people using the panel to tell fans the character couldn't be imagined as a person of color anymore. The whole thing was just a mess, and it soured Homestuck for a lot of fans. There was also stuff like the character Concrete existing, where like his whole personality for a significant chunk of the comic seems to just be getting offended by everything and being a parody of social justice warriors. Some people liked it and found it hilarious, some people really hated it. Or Damara, whose whole personality was just horny Japanese schoolgirl for a bit. Again, a lot of people did not like that, and justifiably so. Lots of characters, plot points, and moments caused that kind of controversy, where they were seen as offensive or tone deaf or were just fought over in general, and oftentimes people had good reason to not like these plot elements. These were just a few examples of things, because the whole story is almost a million words and is very convoluted, but suffice it to say, there were a lot of these controversies, some bigger than others. But I think that if you had to ask me to pin down the most controversial thing among fans in universe, the main thing would probably have to be Vriska. So, okay. There was a lot of discourse in the Homestuck fandom over things like characters and shipping. Shipping was its own beast because there were sort of four types of main relationship in troll culture. There's traditional romantic shipping like we'd think of it. There's a form of relationship they have that I'll describe here oversimplistically as being someone's best enemy, like a sexy arch-rival situation. There's a relationship that kind of means like platonic soulmates, and then there's a relationship type which is basically asking someone to mediate the whole best enemies thing to make sure you two don't destroy each other. These were called the four relationship quadrants, and it was common to ship characters across the lines of these quadrants. Some teenage Homestuck fans would even try to find real-life friends to fill all their quadrants. The platonic soulmate situation was called being someone's moirail, and I remember lots of posts of people calling their friends their moirails, or stuff like half-baked attempts
Dude, every girl I seem to like calls me the Moirel for some reason.
To find a sexy enemy arch-rival.
What's up with that?
There's lots of shipping and character drama pertaining to these trolls, and at the center of a lot of that was a character named Vriska Circuit. I can confidently say she is the most divisive character in the Homestuck fandom. So basically, Vriska is, especially at the start, not a good person. She's manipulative toward all her friends, she's really mean towards several characters for what seems like cruelty for cruelty's sake, and she kills a lot of her friends. Keep in mind that death in Homestuck is very much not permanent because resurrection is a thing and multiple timelines are a thing, and so a character can die and come back and be kind of okay with the fact that they died. A lot of it is video game rules, you know, but still. She does do quite a bit of murder. I would say she's, in academic terms, kind of a huge bitch. And a lot of people don't like her specifically because her levels of huge bitch energy are sort of relatable to people. Like, a lot of the characters in this comic are bad people. Lots of them are murderers, multiple of them are responsible for certain characters being permanently injured, and a lot of them are just not very good people. But the specific way she treats certain people is seen as close to home for a lot of fans. The way she acts towards some of the characters is seen as abusive in ways that feel a bit too real to people. The way she treats her friends reminds them of actual bullying in real life, stuff like that. You've probably never experienced someone trying to murder all of the people you love, or if you have, I'm very sorry, but it's very possible that you
Do I have a story for you guys?
have experienced someone being shitty to you because you don't like them back, or manipulating you to get what they want, or trying to sabotage your own success at something so they can do better than you. The ways in which Vriska was a huge bitch were very real to some people, so she naturally inspired a lot more emotion than some of the other characters. Not only that, but Hussey focused on Vriska in the narrative a lot. A lot of time is devoted in the story to Vriska trying to become a better person and failing, or learning about Vriska's backstory and making her seem sympathetic, or bringing
Here's the problem with me Uh, I don't like this term, but a few of my friends have called me. Actually, no, I'm not gonna mention that. I just really love characters and people who seek redemption after doing bad. I believe in the good of people. I believe that 90% of bad people can change for the better. I think most people can change for the better. I just think that sometimes what they've done in the past can't be re accepted or forgiven. But I love P characters that change. I mean, I think my favorite character of all time is Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think they are a perfect example of redemption and changing for the better. That's why I really fall in love with characters that do that. And it seems like Vriska. Is it Griska? Is it? I'm not. I would love to see what the name is written. Can change. That's why I think that character already appeals to me a lot.
Her back from the dead. Not only that, but a lot of people feel like, given all the times she's depicted as sympathetic, she isn't sufficiently punished for all the bad shit she's done. So this is where my opinion differs from other people's in terms of redemption arcs. I don't think characters need to be physically punished in some way to be redeemed.
Absolutely.
I think redemption arcs are about making amends to the people hurt in as good a way as possible and making an active commitment to do better.
Yeah.
It's why I hate redemption arcs that start and end with a character doing one grand gesture and then dying. I don't think good redemption arcs need to incorporate punishment, but rather a commitment to do better.
Absolutely.
But a lot of
No, I
people
thoroughly
did
agree
feel like
with
she
you.
didn't earn what redemption she got, whether it was because of a lack of punishment or a lack of commitment to do better. Basically, a lot of people saw her as Andrew Hussey's very shitty, very unlikable pet character who was being forced onto the audience despite being a terrible
very
person.
nice.
On the other hand, a lot of folks really, really liked Vriska. For one, a lot of the shitty things she does are, I wouldn't say excusable, but it's at the very least explained beyond just that she's a shitty person who hurts people for no reason, so a lot of fans can be like, oh wow, this is a tragic character, I can sympathize with why she's like this. She's a murderer because she was raised with an abusive parent figure who is a giant spider because Homestuck and who forces her to do it. She's cruel to people because due to her parental figure and background, she sincerely believes she's making them stronger. There are moments where she clearly shows a capacity to be tender and care about others and try to be better,
Vriska.
which makes it fascinating and devastating when she fails to do that. And because she gets so much focus by the narrative, she's very easy to grow attached to. And also,
that makes
speaking
sense.
as a former teenager, I think she's just very easy for
Can I
teenagers.
ask? On the left, it's AG, or begins like A, but the name is VR, like Vriska. What does the AG mean?
To relate to. I honestly feel like a lot of teenagers sometimes just do cruel things and don't really know why they do it. Or they're at a stage where they realize they're selfish people and they want to become better, but it's an uphill battle and it's messy and it's not linear and you feel like you're the main character of life and you're complicated and searching for an identity. And all these intense feelings of being a teenager are, in my opinion, perfectly encapsulated in a character like Vriska. So there are naturally a lot of divides
100%.
when it comes to her. This both included shipping debates with her and the big thing, whether we should like her or hate her. There are people who hate everything she stands for and they think she's a bad character and a bad person. There are people who think she's a bad person but a great character. There are people who feel really attached to her and defend her and feel like she's a good character and a good person. I haven't met anyone who thinks she's a good person and a bad character, but I'm sure they exist, quadrants and all. I feel like this could be a political compass meme if it's not already. Someone get on that. But you can see how, very quickly, these sides could come to hate each other. One person complains that Vriska shows up too much. Someone who loves her comes in to argue that she's a great character and you're being unfair to her. One fan says they think she's a good person. Someone else comes in with a laundry list of bad things she did. Someone else replies that those things were excusable and understandable. Someone else says they're not. And because it's the internet, these people fight forever and ever and ever. It got to the point where the Homestuck forums literally had to create something called a Vriska quarantine thread, which is my favorite thing ever. Literally, they had to have dedicated threads for people to fight about Vriska, or it would bleed over into the rest of the forums. And by the way, if you look into those Vriska quarantine threads, there are lots of posts in them. These things were not a joke. It also spawned the meme, Vriska did nothing wrong, which some people loved and some people hated. My understanding is that most of these people do not actually sincerely believe that Vriska did nothing wrong, but it's more like a glib, ironic thing you say when you like Vriska but don't want to fight about it. They were tired of people getting mad at them for liking a character who's a bad person. Some people also point out that a lot of male characters have done stuff that's pretty much on par with Vriska's actions, and they tend to be humanized more and seen as a lot less divisive by the fandom. So Vriska did nothing wrong quickly became a meme. My favorite moment of that was when someone paid
I be honest, okay, I'm not an expert in this. I feel like it is easy. People find it easier to forget male characters. I don't know the psychology behind it, but I think that's a good point to be made. It is, yeah, that's a good point. It's something I generally don't know much psychology why. Do I agree with it? Absolutely not, of course. But yeah.
Pastor Justin McElroy to say it in an episode of My Brother, and Me. Great stuff.
Vriska did nothing wrong.
Though, of course, you did have some number of people who did unironically believe Vriska did nothing wrong, or that everything she did was okay and excusable, and this phrase got them even more mad, and there's more fighting, and all of that. People who hated her accused people who liked her of all kinds of terrible things and vice versa.
Okay.
How much of it was true? Well, the problem is that the fandom is so big that pretty much any critique of how the fandom acts is gonna be true for some subset of people. Yes, there are people who unironically think Vriska did nothing wrong because there are literally millions of people in the fandom. Yes, there are some people who hate her for the same shit they like male characters for because there are literally millions of people in the fandom, etc., etc. There's always some hypocrisy to point out or reason to hate the other side because there are just so many people that you can always find an example of whatever it is you're criticizing, and you're usually right. The sheer size of the Homestuck fandom and the relatability of the Vriska
It's a blessing and a curse.
by which I mean both people who related to Vriska and people who related to the characters Vriska hurt, made it really personal. Anyway, my point is that Vriska did not do a single bad thing wrong ever in her life. Honestly, the state of the Homestuck fandom was basically a microcosm of fandom in general. It was like every good part and every bad part of most fandoms, but turned up to 11. The good parts were especially good. The creativity was amazing. And
do we think that's because it's a younger audience? Because I don't like when you're younger, like teen, like there's so much you're going through already. And like when you're reading a piece of media that brings out those emotions in you, you don't have that filter on your emotions. They're just so much more raw the younger you are, in my opinion. And no offense if you're younger. I mean, listen, you might be really mature for your age, but I think the more you age, the more you grow, the more filter doesn't mean that you suppress it. It means that you know how to navigate it. And when they have this large younger audience, it's a case of there's just so much raw emotions in their arguments, and then when you clash that with someone else, it becomes this big, things become bigger than what they need to be, if that makes sense.
So was the feeling of being part of something so big and collective and special, big enough to have this massive fan community, but indie enough to feel intimate. And the bad parts, from character discourse to discrimination within the fandom to how some fans were perceived by outsiders, felt exponentially so because of the sheer scale and nature of Homestuck. But despite being the peak of the fandom, this was only the start, because the world of Homestuck was about to get a lot bigger and a lot messier.
Okay.
$2.5 million messier.
Oh. That's a lot of money.
In 2012, Homestuck was at the height of its popularity. It had a massive online presence, was bringing lots of money in via merch and soundtrack sales, and there was a plethora of fan content and coverage for the series. Homestuck was becoming less and less of just a niche online thing and more of a media empire. And when something gets this big and this popular, it's only natural to want to expand beyond the scope of what you had originally planned. Enter the Homestuck Kickstarter. On September 4th, 2012, Hussie started a Kickstarter for what was simply called the Homestuck Adventure Game. It would later, like way later, get an actual name, Hiveswap. The Kickstarter states that with the end of Homestuck on the horizon, Author's note, Homestuck would not be finished until 4 years after this. Hussey wanted to start turning his attention to making a video game version of the series. And this makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Homestuck the comic was a parody of adventure games, and so it's only natural for it to become an actual adventure game. Not much was said about the plot or storyline or anything like that, beyond that it would be a self-contained story focusing on its own cast of characters, unrelated to the plot and ensemble of Homestuck while still taking place in its world.
Okay.
They were asking for $700,000 with an estimated release date of 2 years later in 2014. So overall, looking at this Kickstarter page, it seems pretty reasonable and well put together. He's very upfront about how much money goes into making a video game, states that any extra money obtained will be spent expanding the scope and support for the project, and there were numerous enticing rewards and incentives that should excite people even if they weren't on board for a full adventure game. There's not a lot in terms of, say, a proof.
I think the key word or key phrase is that extra money go towards expanding the game itself. So if they asked for 700,000, they got 2.5 mil. That's like 4 times. Like it's a lot. And if they order a 2-year frame, if they want to add they want to make the game 4 times bigger, I feel like this is where problems start to
concept or character designs or anything like
arise.
that. But did you really need any of that stuff? This was a Homestuck. That's all you needed to know. All
People
Hussey
just wanna
really had to
support
do to excite
something
people
that they
was
love,
just include a montage
beautiful.
trailer of Homestuck's best moments set to dramatic music and say, Homestuck video game, and people would eat it up. And eat it up they did, because the Homestuck Kickstarter quickly met its $700,000 goal, like within less than 2 days. It got $400,000 on its first day alone, and then kept going. And going, and going, and going, until eventually, by the end of its run, it made $2.5 million from nearly 25,000 people, which is a ludicrous amount of money. With this, they were able to add Mac and Linux support, multiple language options, a physical release of the game, an art book, and even a digital copy of Homestuck would be included with every physical release, not to mention the reward tiers. Most of the tiers were pretty standard stuff. The lowest tier was $15, which would get you the game. A little bit more would get you the soundtrack, higher tiers would get merch, all that stuff. But where it got really interesting was the much higher tiers. $5,000 would get you all the earlier stuff, plus a custom commission by Hussey. 2 people pledged that much. $10,000, on the other hand, was the highest tier. This is actually the maximum amount of money Kickstarter will let an individual person donate to one project, so this was especially wild. $10,000 would not only include all the previous rewards, but also the opportunity for your fan troll to become a canon part of Homestuck. And 2 people actually went for it. 2 people pledged $10,000 to the video game in order for their fan troll to become an actual part of Homestuck. These fan trolls who are, yes, now a canon part of actual Homestuck were this one named Mierfa Durgus and this one named Necton Whelan. Here they are in Homestuck.
That's really cool.
I don't know if I like this or not. I feel like I'm drinking clown tears in a way. Just the fact that people were willing to give 10 grand to Andrew Hussey in exchange for canon fan trolls is telling in and of itself of what Homestuck's fan atmosphere was like. But what's interesting is that technically other tiers also existed. These weren't officially available on Kickstarter since 10 grand was the limit, but they were still listed elsewhere and they were mostly intended as a joke. No one actually donated to them, no one was really supposed to either. But they were still technically options. At 100k, your character, in Hussey's words, will survive for more than 1 page. At 1 million, they would become the most important character in Homestuck.
Wow.
I know no one was ever going to donate to this tier, but to this day, I still wish someone had. I just want to see how that would have happened in the writing. Like, how do you justify that? Hussey, if you're watching this, it's not too late. You can go back and change things. You've done it before. Please make my fan troll the most important.
Guys, hear me out, okay? If we get how many views? We could work towards this. We can make a fan troll. We can reach out to Hussey and be like, hey, I'll give you 1 million. If we all pitch together here, we could possibly create something beautiful.
Of Homestuck. $10 million would get Hussey to like one of your posts. 100 million would get a reblog, and just in case there were any eclectic billionaires out there, 1 billion would get you a courteous thank you note. I know these were joke tiers, but like in all fairness, this is absolutely something I could see Elon Musk doing. point being, the absolute dedication that people had to Homestuck was really exemplified by the fact that people were willing to pay that much just to appear in a page of it, even knowing their character was likely not going to survive for more than that page. It didn't matter. It was the chance to be in Homestuck. This was exciting. Everyone was so on board. Things were going great. And then they weren't. Because as we all know, getting the money from Kickstarter is only half the struggle.
Yeah, it's
the
actually
other part is what to do once you actually have all that money. So with millions of dollars in the bank and fan expectations on the rise, it was time to get started on the Homestuck adventure game. And start it they did. Kind of. Sort of. Not really. Because the planned June 2014 release date just came and went, with no new updates on what happened or what was going on.
Okay, I believe that 90% of problems arise from lack of communication. And I think if you're in the position of Andrew Hussey, okay, I don't even know the full story of what happened is, but if you just say like, dude, this is so much more than I expected, and I want to use it properly, so here's what my plan is with it. I'm going to keep you updated. We're not going to reach the intended date, but I hope you can bear with. I feel like the community, some would be disappointed, and there's always going to be that portion of haters and whatnot. But for the large majority, if you're passionate about the project in itself, and if you just say, I want it to be something that I'm proud of and that you actually enjoy, I think if you're a fan of the content and the work, you're happy to wait, you know?
There's a really great document compiled by a blogger named Giovanni titled The Hiveswap Fiasco that has a lot of screenshots and in-depth logs from this time saved. It's a really invaluable resource, and if you'd like to read Gio's account of everything that happened with the Kickstarter, I'll link it in the description. It was a really helpful source for my research, so full credit to Giovanni for putting a lot of this together in one easily accessible place. The most important takeaway from everything with Hiveswap is that it very quickly lost track of its original goal in terms of when the finished game was going to come out, to the extent where for years, lots of people were convinced it was never going to happen. For one, there was a surprising lack of transparency from the team about how the game was going and when it was going to come out. The plan was for Hussey to do weekly updates so that the backers would know what was going on with development, even if it took a bit longer than usual. Because, yeah, on one hand, the team got a lot more money than what their initial goal was, and oftentimes that can mean certain products might take longer to put together, especially because this was Hussey's first actual full-fledged adventure game, and sometimes things just take longer than you expect if you're new to something. But the backers got almost nothing. All they really got for about a year was updates about shipping out merch for the backer rewards, which, to be fair, is a big undertaking. There were tens of thousands of backers. There's a lot to do. But people got nothing about the development or an updated timeline or anything like that. Just merch.
It's such a big project for someone to do. And like, I don't know Andrew Hussey's background and what they do, but like, having to be in charge of merch, video game creating, while still producing Homestuck, that is way too much for one person to manage.
Mentioning here that from October 2013 to October 2014, the webcomic was also completely on hold. This is something called the Gigapause, and it was a time of collective despair for the Homestuck fandom. I'll talk more about the pauses and update scheduling later, but the most important thing here is that there was no new content for Homestuck fans to really enjoy for an entire year, which is a big deal to fans because they were used to regular serial updates. Almost 3 months into the Gigapause, on December 31st, 2013, the backers got their first, actual game update. It was titled the first annual Homestuck Kickstarter update, and although it was only visible to backers, luckily for me, people quickly shared the contents of the update around the internet. Thanks, something awful. It featured some character models and sketches, information about the design work being nearly done, and a lot of Hussey telling you why they can't tell you more. Basically, everything that had happened so far was either a massive spoiler or really boring paperwork. The most important thing, though, was some more information about what the story of the game would look like. Notably, Spurb, aka the game that exists in universe and jump-started the whole comic and ended the world, would not—
I gotta quickly use the toilet. Please take this as a time to drink some water and hydrate and do what you gotta do. I mean, I'm gonna be back in a second because I'm gonna cut it, but, you know, do what you gotta do. I'll be right back.
wouldn't just be a recreation of Spurb, which makes sense because in the world of Homestuck, Spurb isn't really an adventure game so much as just like a sandbox sim-like game where you can mess with things. It also wouldn't be multiplayer, wouldn't feature any voice acting, would feature a new story with primarily new characters. You didn't technically need to read Homestuck to understand the game, and finally, most importantly, it would feature trolls. It also included the line, "I can only hope it was at least mildly frustrating for you to read because that probably means you want to play the game," which, amazing. Very consistent with everything we know about Hussey so far. Love it. And that was all people heard about it for almost 7 months.
Oh, damn.
The fact
From
that this
weekly
comic
updates
was also on, well, Gigapause made the lack of information coming out of the Kickstarter even worse. Like, imagine you're a devoted Homestuck fan. It's June 2014 when the game was originally slated to come out, and you're almost completely in the dark about how development is going and if you're even gonna get an actual game in the first place. That would be frustrating for fans of any media property, but now also
100%.
factor in the fact that you haven't had any Homestuck content at all for 8 months now and no idea when the comic is supposed to resume. Suffice it to say, a lot of fans were pretty annoyed. Don't get me wrong, you had people saying to be patient, that stuff like this takes time, not to pressure the people working on it, all that. But the idea that hiveswap was taking forever or would never actually be finished very quickly became a popular sentiment, which is why finally, at the very end of the month, half a year after the first update, people got their second. Helpfully titled First Annual Homestuck Kickstarter Update Part 2, the update included some pretty neat concept art, like this palace and these axolotls, this picture of a new troll with a caption saying this was all they could tell backers about that character so far, and most importantly, it introduced the Odd Gentleman to us. These are going to become some important players in the hiveswap tale. So, okay, The Odd Gentleman is a small Pasadena-based game studio founded in 2008, and part 2 of the update included telling fans that this...
Okay, I feel like there is a problem with telling the people who the developers are. And because it's a project that's already delayed and lack of communicating and the fan base is becoming like, I think unruly is a good way to describe it. By telling the people who the developers are, hopefully this 100% happened, unfortunately, but people would use that as a funnel to somewhere to attack and harass, to try and push the project along, instead of just like, we all know that all that would do is just like, you know, demotivate and just, mentally harm the developers. It just creates this target for people to hurl their abuse at besides Andrew Hussey.
Was the studio that was going to officially be developing hiveswap. According to the Post, they were chosen for a few reasons. Most importantly, the scheduling just worked out for the whole thing, and they liked the people who worked there and were confident about their ability to deliver a good game. They also addressed some of the criticism about how the game was supposed to be out by now, and they seem to have, just picked a developer just because they were there and also had only shared a single game-related update until then over the course of nearly 2 years. In Hussey's words,
2014 was the year we were shooting for release. Note, there was no target month given because I really didn't know what the time frame was down to that level of specificity. I expected there would be bumps in the road because there always are for big projects like this. When the Kickstarter ended, that is not really when development began in earnest. That's when we began getting a lot of boring legal stuff in order, which took a while. Probably around 6 months, I'd say. After that, planning began for real. So if we are behind schedule, which may not even be technically true, I guess it could be by that amount of time. But I'm anticipating a major surge in development in the latter half of 2014. So we'll see where we are as we approach the end of the year. Thanks for the patience.
So, okay, a couple things. Firstly, it's super weird to assert that they're not actually behind schedule because they never said when in 2014 the game was supposed to be out. Like, they said June. The Kickstarter says June. You can go back and check. It still says that. And, like, stuff is late all the time. Shit happens. You can just say that. Weird. The implication also seems to be that the game should probably be out within a little while. They say development is going to start to ramp up soon and that they'll review their progress by the end of the year. The update didn't necessarily satisfy everyone. Some people were just getting really frustrated with the whole thing as expected, but the inclusion of some of the concept art like the axolotl and some kind of assurance that things were on track and would be out soon definitely helped to comfort a number of fans. Like, okay, the studio knows what it's doing, no weird setbacks or curveballs. So
okay, the thing is that The problem is when you take people's money, there's an expectation. Like, let's say, ish, that's the main thing is that you are providing a service or a product, and when you say you're gonna do it and you don't do it, you take money, which, this could be like 70 quid, $70 is a lot for some people, if they donated, they expected this thing by a certain date. That's just like, when I was a kid, dude, even 25 pounds, 25 quid, that was a lot of money for me, and if it's delayed by so I could see myself getting pretty annoyed about that when I was younger.
Anyway, 3 months later, the fans get a weird curveball. Apparently, the Odd Gentlemen were dropped as the official game studio developing Hiveswap just months after they announced that the Odd Gentlemen were there. Instead, they're now having it be run by What Pumpkin. So, okay, What Pumpkin is kind of hard to explain because what exactly it is has sort of shifted over time. But the easiest way to explain it is that What Pumpkin is basically the in-house production company for Homestuck run by Andrew Hussey. It's taken on a lot of different functions over time. What Pumpkin was originally just the record label used for Homestuck music, then it was the online store where you could buy Homestuck merch, and now it's doing game development, I guess. It just kind of became a game dev studio as well as a record label and merch site. So the Odd Gentlemen were kicked off the project, and What Pumpkin very suddenly expanded, now turning into two branches for the company. There was What Pumpkin Florida, which covered merch and the like, and then What Pumpkin Studios New York, which was apparently now a game dev studio. There was a 3-year non-disclosure agreement on the people who worked for the Odd Gentlemen, so for a long time, no one knew exactly what happened there, why they were kicked off the project, and why all of a sudden there was this in-house production company handling the whole thing.
Is there tea? Is there drama?
The NDA has since expired, so there's some very interesting information out there about what exactly went down. Particularly interesting, though, is the rumor that the reason it all happened is kind of just that Hussey didn't communicate the right information to the studio and didn't have them doing anything actually helpful in terms of game development. So, okay, this information again comes from Giovanni, the person who created a really helpful timeline of the Kickstarter stuff. Gio apparently spoke with several people who worked on the game before it went down and did some independent research to corroborate as much of it as possible, including statements by Hussey himself, all of which are sourced in the article. I'll link that one too. Some of these sources are anonymous, so take everything I'm about to say here with a grain of salt. I will say that a lot of the smaller claims are backed up, but still, don't take this as 100% fact unless there is a source there. I also don't want to get sued for reporting on this, so I'm not going to make any definitive statements about what happened here. Rather, just that this is what Gio and the people involved who Gio allegedly spoke to have reported on. It's also worth mentioning that there are kind of two sides of the story.
I'm assuming the creator of this video is Canadian. Suing culture seems so weird to me. I mean, we don't really have it. I mean, we probably have it a little in the UK, but it's like so like this American. I thought the whole thing was like freedom of speech and whatnot, but in America, suing culture. It just seems so bizarre. I don't know. I just seen a lot of these Karens be like, "I'm gonna sue your ass."
The inside scoop on exactly what went down with Hiveswap. There's the stuff Gio reports on, which frames the Odd Gentleman in a more or less positive light and Hussey in a negative light. And then there's this other post from one of Andrew Hussey's personal friends, an artist who goes by I Punch Gay Deer or just IPGD. She shared a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff on Homestuck before and is widely considered to be in the loop. What both sides here agree on is that for the first couple years of Hiveswap's development, very little actual progress got made. The stuff the Odd Gentleman made wasn't overly usable, and a lot of time and money was spent and ultimately kind of wasted on these first couple years. Where these accounts differ, however, is exactly whose fault that is. According to IPGD's side of the story, the reason things went so slowly and poorly for the first couple years is that the Odd Gentleman didn't, do anything. They were given money to work on Hiveswap, a lot of it, and they just kind of dicked around and blew off the agreed upon schedule. Instead, they mostly just made a shitty demo that wasn't really usable. IPGD criticizes the Odd Gentleman for taking the money and then not really doing anything to work on the game, instead prioritizing their own personal project. To be clear, the Odd Gentlemen were involved with making Hiveswap for quite a while before the actual Patreon announcement introducing them, so this 2-year period would have been from 2012, where behind the scenes the team was getting ready to organize the Kickstarter and get everything in motion, and 2014. According to the Geo article, the problem started when Hussey didn't provide the studio with any design documents, including the specifics of what exactly was needed to make the game, meaning the only thing the team could work on for Hiveswap during the first couple years of production were just general assets and nothing specific to the story. According to this side, they couldn't make much because they just weren't given any information about what they were actually supposed to be doing. What's interesting is that the Kickstarter notes for Hiveswap do seem to corroborate the second account, that they weren't given the design document until way late into the game. We know that because we actually saw a picture of the design document in the June 2014 update with text telling us that it was almost done. Here's the picture and here's the quote.
The game design documents comprise dozens of files and around a couple 100,000 words in total. Last winter, Ryan North and I scribbled down all this stuff. The basic outline of the game, tons of funny ideas and puzzles and such. Then, in the following months, I and some other people
this actually does collaborate.
That programmers can actually understand and turn into a game.
The gentleman
So what
people.
does that mean for the status of development? Since all the documentation is just about done, it's out of my hands at this point.
So basically, it very much seems like Hussey himself is saying that the design document only got finished around June-ish, which does corroborate the idea that the developers weren't given the documents they needed for a really long time. Again, there are two wildly contrasting perspectives here. IPGD alleges that the Odd Gentleman actually took this money and pretty much ran with it, using it to fund their own game instead. According to this accusation, they stole Kickstarter money to work on a game called King's Quest, a game that they'd repeatedly implied they cared more about and would prefer to be working on. Again, there's no proof of the accusation that they spent a couple $100,000
That is
of
not what you want to hear from your developers.
It's possible that this is true, and everyone involved in the conversation will readily admit that the Odd Gentleman spent more time working on King's Quest than they did on Hiveswap. But again, the point of contention is whether this is because they were screwing Andrew Hussey over, or because Andrew Hussey didn't give them anything to work with for Hiveswap in the first place. If Hiveswap was running out of money because the Odd Gentleman screwed over Andrew Hussey and embezzled it to make their own game, it's a pretty open and shut case of a creator being exploited. It points to a lack of business acumen on Hussey's part, but he's definitely not a bad person for getting screwed over. But another side of the story paints the situation in a completely different light. Another claim, again from an anonymous source who's...
The thing I'm gathering at the moment is I feel like it is Andrew's fault a little bit, but that's not his fault entirely. And I know that sounds confusing. The reason I say this is that, like, he's not a game developer. He's not in charge. So when you create this project, he doesn't know what he has to do entirely, what every single detail, what the process looks like. So he's just a guy, he just rewrote this little funny comic. So I feel like it's his fault, but it's not. You know what I mean?
If that makes sense. Is that
at some point during that time, Andrew had TOG spend their budget, the Kickstarter funds, on making 3D animatics and animations for the Homestuck finale video, Act 7, instead of working on Hiveswap. Andrew justified this by saying the properties were related and the Act 7 assets would be used in Hiveswap. Significant portions of the Act 7 animation were in progress or finalized as early as 2013, the work all done in secret by the Odd Gentleman.
Just like the IPGD allegations, this is hard to corroborate. I mean, apparently Geo spoke to several people who worked on the game who said that Hussey was cagey about who did the Act 7 work, which doesn't 100% confirm that the Odd Gentleman did it, but does raise suspicion. But because this is also an anonymous source and it's not backed up by any specific thing Hussey says, you do have to kind of take their word for it. It definitely seems like Geo did their due diligence in reporting on this. They even created the super helpful timeline picture, but I think this is worth taking with a grain of salt. If this is true, it would essentially mean that money that was supposed to go to Hiveswap was actually used on trying to finish Hussey's webcomic. If this is true, it points to backers being lied to. This is a pretty serious accusation, and again, it's not one I feel comfortable simply regurgitating uncritically. A lot of this comes from anonymous sources who...
I know it is lying to the backers, but I feel like the backers, if he communicated that, they wouldn't be mad about it. But the fact that they're being cagey about it, that's where the problems arise.
Credibility I can't confirm. Again, there are basically two word-of-mouth accusations here that support completely different theories. One where the Hiveswap money was misappropriated by the Odd Gentleman for their personal game, and one where the Hiveswap money was misappropriated by Andrew Hussey for his personal comic. Either way, It's a shit show. I will say that there are a few things here that very much suggest that the Odd Gentleman worked on at least some small part of Homestuck without being credited. For instance, Hussey talks here about when he finished the storyboard for those parts, and if you look at the dates, that's right before he started working with the Odd Gentleman. So it's definitely possible that the Odd Gentleman did uncredited work on parts of Homestuck using money that was supposed to be for hiveswap. I can't and won't say for sure whether it's true, but I think the fact that this is an accusation.
I'm on the edge of my seat here because I actually don't know if hiveswap has been released since then. Like, I don't know what the end of hiveswap, like, is it out?
Aiden talked about is still important in terms of dissecting exactly what happened to get the Odd Gentleman kicked off the game. My instinct in terms of who screwed over who here is that the truth lies somewhere in between these two accounts. In the worst case scenario, this paints Hussey as someone who actively screwed those people over, and in the best case scenario, he himself is painted as someone who got screwed over and just isn't very good at managing a business.
Yeah.
In any case, in terms of the less contentious stuff that isn't about embezzlement, both sides here do agree on the fact that the Odd Gentleman didn't really do much work on the actual game over those 2 years. The real point of contention is, again, just whose fault that was. Given the fact that we do know it took Hussey almost those full 2 years to come up with the appropriate documents, I'm inclined to mostly side with the Odd Gentleman here. No matter what the cause for not much of use being produced over those 2 years, the Odd Gentlemen were officially off the project, and the creation of the new game studio with What Pumpkin was theoretically going to refresh development for the project and get things as back on track as possible, which is especially important because it was nearing the end of 2014, and if the stuff produced up until that point really was as nothing as it seemed, they were going to have to get a lot done. So, did they? Well, So the announcement that What Pumpkin was becoming a game studio contains some more information as well, including the very interesting revelation that there would be multiple games. Hiveswap was going to be the first game, and then there would be a sequel titled Haunt Switch. Not only that, but the release of these games was going to be episodic.
This is where it's a big red flag for me, because I think trying to do it, develop multiple games or like planning, just focus on the first project for now, you know, take your project like, because you learn from each one, whereas if you try and do it all in one go, I don't know, I think it's a recipe for disaster.
So basically each game was going to be divided into about 4 parts that would be released over time as they finished. So although episodic release is usually kind of risky because making the remaining parts tends to be contingent on part 1 doing well, the idea was that Homestuck fans would be used to this format and would therefore support the game. The announcement also included, again, a whole bunch of concept art designed to get people excited.
That looks
like, suffice
sick.
it to say, this whole thing was a really big update for a lot of reasons. Backers got a few more months of radio silence as the end of 2014, aka the projected release year of Hiveswap, passed by. At this point, any hopes for the promised weekly updates were pretty much gone, and fans were just hoping for whatever they could get. The next update came in February 2015, and updates started to get a bit more frequent. February got people a video of some 3D models, and April got fans quite a bit. Emerald City Comic Con was on, and What Pumpkin had a booth there, plus some gameplay previews, and most importantly, an actual teaser trailer on the 10th. The teaser showed off some gameplay, the 3D nature of the game, some music, and the projected release date,
looks pretty good.
mid-2015. The mid-2015 thing was repeated again the month after, where developer Jess Haskins promised that Hiveswap would be out in the second quarter of that year. Okay, sure. Looking at the YouTube comments, they're not super positive. Like, don't get me wrong, people were still mostly excited for the game, but a lot of people just didn't think it looked very good, especially not for a game that raised $2.5 million in years of waiting and promises of elaborate adventure stuff. The frame rate was the biggest concern for people, and you can see a lot of comments just being kind of underwhelmed at worst and whelmed at most. People still wanted to see the game happen, but it seems like the more information people got about it, the less mystery and excitement and assurance that this was going to be great there was.
I think there's so much, like, the whole development process has left such a sour taste in people's mouth. It's just tough to follow that up. You have to really deliver. And even if you do, because there's people are just going to come out with such a negative view because of everything beforehand, it's a really tough one.
Spoiler alert, this game would not come out for the next while. Keep in mind, we're still at 2015 in our timeline, and so we're not going to see the release of hiveswap for a while. Don't worry, we'll get there. But suffice it to say, right now, the fan atmosphere leading up to hiveswap was just a lot less earnest and excited. There was also one more update at the end of 2015 with another weird curveball. So I know this might be a crazy stretch of an interpretation, but some of y'all might just possibly be getting the idea that What Pumpkin is not a very well-managed company. Just maybe. So December 2015, they put out a release over Kickstarter explaining that the entire What Pumpkin New York staff had been fired. If you remember, that's one of the subdivisions of What Pumpkin that got made after they fired the Odd Gentleman.
Isn't that the game
subdivision responsible for handling the game. The statement doesn't really say much about why this happened. Here's what we get.
Most of the people who worked on the game in New York unfortunately are no longer with us, as the studio has been restructured to be more of a geographically distributed operation to help save costs. We really appreciate everything they did for hiveswap and the passion they put into the game. I would like to sincerely thank them for all the great work they did for this phase of the project. Running a studio in New York for a while was actually a lot of fun. They were all wonderful people, and I wish them the best.
Cool. Okay. Apparently, this was a shock to the people working on the game.
That's such a
They were just kind of
response.
Fired, just like that. It wasn't expected, it wasn't really planned for, they kind of just lost their jobs, and apparently there was nothing in the way of severance pay provided or anything like that. The assumption here is that they just ran out of money to pay those people. According to Daniel Kelly, a contractor who worked with What Pumpkin and is now no longer under NDA, What Pumpkin started quietly fundraising from outside sources a few months after this. So the idea that they just didn't have enough money to keep the New York staff working there is probably what happened.
Because they're in freaking New York. The only good thing about New York these days is Mumdani, but New York itself, it's so expensive to live and rent out. Go to like an Ohio or like a random state and set up the development there. It's so much cheaper.
It was this weird sudden thing that now cut down on half the development staff.
New York's so expensive.
According to some of the people who worked there was also no real lead up to it. The blog post from someone who used to work on hiveswap and then got fired after the New York office closed has a lot of interesting insight as to the whole situation. For instance, this whole thing super abruptly happened in October, and right before, they were all repeatedly being told that things were going fine. Look at this.
We had issues with the owners of the company, aka the webcomic creator, and them being transparent with us. We had known 2 months prior to the layoffs that there was a tightening of the budget, as we had to let go of an animator and 2 writers/data people. A few others, myself included, had their hours cut. The night before we all got laid off, we had received an email from our investor recruiter that we had interest from angel investors and things were looking good.
That's so
we
bad.
might even get pay raises. Talk about mixed signals.
So bad.
The owners didn't talk to us. They didn't tell us when we were in trouble, and we trusted them.
So, a well-run company. Also, hiveswap was no longer going to be in 3D. The game is 2D now, and all the 3D assets they made are just gonna go to waste.
Fun?
Years of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars just gone like that. That's not to say this was a bad decision in terms of the quality of the visuals.
Yeah.
The frame rate was pretty rough beforehand, very Dragon Prince Season 1. But suffice it to say, it was increasingly clear that What Pumpkin did not know what they were doing, and the whole situation was a mess. Hopes that the game would come out well, or soon, or at all, were really dwindling. Lucky for Homestuck fans, they did actually get some game content in the late half of 2015 based on a Kickstarter from someone involved with Homestuck that was charming and enjoyable. It just wasn't hiveswap. So Undertale is a game you have almost certainly heard of extensively. It's a pixel RPG that utilizes a lot of old adventure game tropes. It's made by this one guy named Toby Fox. It got really, really, really popular. This isn't news to most of you. But what some people don't know is that there's a really deep connection between Toby Fox and Homestuck. Like, Fox used to make music for Homestuck pretty regularly. He developed a lot of Undertale in Andrew Hussey's basement. The song Megalovania, the iconic boss battle song song at the end of Undertale's No Mercy run was originally used in Homestuck.
Oh
the
shit, I
Undertale
did not know
Kickstarter
that.
promises one person the option of having your canon fan troll in the game, though that's a whole other can of worms. So if you're a Homestuck fan, it's kind of wild to see how Undertale, a project that's very, very steeped in everything Homestuck, that came from the guy who composed a song about Homestuck characters giving birth to each other and did a lot of this work at Andrew Hussey's house, so quickly become a thing beyond the confines of Homestuck. A lot of Homestuck fans quickly latched onto Undertale in Hiveswap's absence. That also might be a part of why Undertale also has such a reputation for its fans being very loud and very zealous. It's a few things.
Yeah,
some of it is just
okay.
that there were a lot of kids in the fandom, some of it is just that there were a lot of Undertale fans and therefore a lot of pretty loud and wild Undertale fans, and some of it is that a lot of these people were Homestucks. But part of the reason a lot of these fans started focusing less on Hiveswap, less on Homestuck, and more on Undertale is that between July 2015 and March 2016, Homestuck was, once again, on pause.
Ooh, another one? Oh shit. The thing is that from my experience, there's a lot of crossover between Homestuck and Undertale fans. I mean, whenever I mention Homestuck in a video, I mentioned it like maybe twice. And every time I mention it, they're like, please, you need to check out Homestuck. I'm telling you, it's the greatest thing ever. And it might be, honestly, I don't know. I'm not trying to discredit that or anything like that, but there is a big crossover in my experience.
This was called the Omega Pause. So not only was there no new Hiveswap content, but there was also, again, no new Homestuck content. Suffice it to say, we weren't going to find out more about Hiveswap for a little while, because in March 2016, the Omega Pause ended and Homestuck was back in business. And pretty soon, the comic was going to end.
Oh, finito. Wasn't it
So
Act 7?
Homestuck was
though?
on and off
Was it
hiatus for a
Act 6?
large proportion of the time that Hiveswap development was happening. This was increasingly leading to a dwindling and frustrated fan base. That's not to say that no one got excited for updates or cared about the story anymore.
Yeah.
Lots of people did, and lots of people made some pretty amazing fan works and got hyped about the game and updates and stuck with it the whole time. I will say that the people who did stick around for all of this were pretty tenacious, but Homestuck's golden days were definitely over. The resuming of Homestuck after the 2015-2016 Omega Pause also coincided with the MSPA forums finally being shut down. If you tried to follow the link to the forums, you'd get this notice that they were temporarily down for maintenance and they'd be back up soon. And then they never came back up. They were just down forever in the equivalent of what some
really
fans would
sad.
compare to your dad going out for a pack of cigarettes and never returning. It was later
That's so
confirmed
sad.
that all the content on the forums was
man.
corrupted and that everything that was once on there is deleted, accessible now only via
To
web archive.
internet, yeah. Internet
You'd think
archive.
this would be a big moment for the fandom, with the forums that were a part of Homestuck from the very start being shut down, but it just kind of wasn't. Largely because the forums shuttering wasn't this big event. They were just supposed to be back up and then never were. While it didn't shatter the fandom, I think it's representative of the same way a lot of mainstream interest in Homestuck died. Not with a bang, but with interest gradually petering out in the absence of new content. Again, not true for everyone. The people who were still left made a lot of great and impressive things, and I don't want to dismiss their interest. But if you ask a lot of people when they fell off Homestuck, it's usually a pretty common answer to say
During the
around
break.
late 2015-ish, just because of a mix of outgrowing certain interests and there not being that much content to sustain oneself on anymore. Homestuck's sixth
Wait,
act
that is
spanned
actually
from
such a good point. I mean, usually when you grow up with a franchise, there's loyalty towards it and whatnot, but there are people who just could have outgrown it. And like when there's a lack of the content to grow up with, and you see a franchise start to, I don't want to say like bleed out, but like there's a lack of consistency. That's the word I was looking for. I guess it's like you can kind of outgrow it in those gaps, if that makes sense. I mean, you know, the young audience. A lot
2013
changes
to
for
a
people.
month after the forums went down in 2016. So Act 6 was what most people were consuming during the time of most of the pauses and the Kickstarter stuff. Its reception was fine. The fan consensus seems to be that a lot of parts of Act 6 kind of blend together and aren't that memorable. Like, there's what's functionally a 3-year time skip in there that's generally just not liked by fans and is seen as boring and unnecessary. But there's also some fun character moments, poignant exploration of real-world issues, and some beautiful animated sequences. It's not generally considered to be Homestuck at its best, but it's not generally considered to be Homestuck at its worst either. It's just kind of considered to be okay Homestuck. Mostly. The main controversy about Act 6 is from what some people saw as a cool move and what some people saw as Homestuck jumping the shark. This was an event called the Retcon, which was pretty controversial. Basically, after a whole bunch of shit goes down in Act 6, a lot of characters are at their lowest points. People have died, it looks bad for everyone, lots of personal struggles, all that. A couple of the characters work together to create a new timeline where stuff is better, and basically they all shift to this timeline. And a lot of people fucking hated this.
What?
For one, they just thought it was hasty and not well written. They were expecting the arc villains to be defeated in a cool way, and then the stuff just didn't happen, and a lot of people saw it as clunky and uninteresting. Like, don't get me wrong, the production on it was still great, but many fans didn't like the writing. Homestuck was no stranger to weird timeline shit happening, but usually when the timelines shift, it has lasting consequences of some kind, or people are impacted in some emotional way. But a lot of folks felt like because all the stuff in Act 6 got retconned, the story and character development just didn't matter. The act had stuff like some characters dealing with addiction, for example, that just got retconned and now it's fixed because timelines.
Wait, so like when they change timelines, do they not have all the previous stuff they experienced in the timeline? If that makes sense? Like, let's say, for example, I ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I've never eaten a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I want to try that now, actually. I ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for the first time yesterday, but then the timeline retcons for like a week. Did I never have that experience of eating the PB&J?
None of the years worth of content, years worth of
really want a
things they waited
PB&J
through
now.
multiple hiatuses for mattered to the story. It was bad to these people not only because it discredited years of out-of-universe time and stories people were invested in, but it also made it harder for people to get invested in future stuff. If none of it matters, if it can all just get retconned, why care? But some people did really like it. They liked that the retcon timeline brought back characters they didn't want to see die, that some characters came from the original timeline so people still learn things and the characterization still mattered, and that it works thematically because of the video game-like nature of the story and how it's a way of demonstrating recovery from rock bottom. Basically, these fans contested the implication that the retcon didn't matter and really liked the positive changes that came from it. Also, one of the reasons this was so controversial is that it brought Vriska back from the dead, so everything involving Vriska once again made this divisive as hell. The stuff involving the retcon was kind of a microcosm of how fans perceived Act 6. Some people loved it, some people hated it, but overall, reception was lukewarm compared to the golden days of Act 5.
So the clown
I'm
tears.
drinking Drano. I feel like this is my Heather's moment. Act 6 ended with a flash animation called S Collide on April 6th, 2016. There were all these big plans in universe regarding how this big fight was gonna go, and this is where a lot of it went down for the end of Act 6. People widely consider the animation and music for Collide to be great. There was some cool art, some great moments, and just generally a lot of neat stuff. At the same time, a lot of fans found it kind of underwhelming. Like, you know how in heist movies, if they give the audience a detailed plan in advance, you kind of expect some element of it to go wrong in order to keep it interesting? That didn't really happen here. It was just them carrying out the exact plan that readers were expecting them to. Everything just went as expected. No big surprises, no curveballs, no new challenges. It definitely wasn't seen as the worst thing in the world, like it was technically very well executed and a lot of fans liked it. But at the same time, everything fans were expecting to happen just kind of happened, so there wasn't a ton of tension.
1 second. Sorry about that. I was fixing my hair and my ear fell off.
Basically, going into Act 6, fans weren't pessimistic, but they were really hoping for something to excite them. So Act 7 was the final act of Homestuck as we know it. It began and ended on April 13th, 2016, the 7-year anniversary of Homestuck. Act 7 consisted of a 9-minute animation that resolved the story of Homestuck titled The Rapture. Plans for this had apparently been in effect for years, and it was time for the big, epic conclusion.
I'm assuming it's been in product for years because they had the Gentleman people working on it, right?
Thought about Homestuck in years tuned in just to see how it would end. The fact that it managed to end on the anniversary was so perfect for people. It was like nostalgic bookends on a fandom that symbolized so many people's middle school and high school years. If you check the Google Trends page for Homestuck, it's declining, and then there's this big spike, and yeah, that's the end of Homestuck. The actual story end itself basically shows the characters accomplishing what they set out to do from the beginning. They win, they create their new world, and they get to live happily on Earth. The actual quality of the animation is really pretty and really good, and you can see how far the story had come since the days of crude flash animations. We get to see the characters happy. There's this part that says thanks for playing. And for people who got off the Homestuck wagon and came back to see it end, there's something really nostalgic about the entire thing. This is a piece of media that's existed for 7 years, and it's grown so much, and it's big and complex, and it finally gets this send-off, and it's exciting. But is the finale actually, like, good? Well, as with any fandom as big as Homestuck, it depends who you ask, but the finale was definitely controversial, especially among fans who had stuck with Homestuck the whole time.
Unlike me, finishing is tough. You know, I'm usually pretty good at it, too good at it, but it's tough for, like, it's so hard to see a series end well. I actually cannot think of a series that people love the finale. Not that I've watched. I mean, Game of Thrones is a really good example of that. Even more recently, The Boys, people didn't like the finale. There's a lot of problems with the last season. It is really tough for when a creator doesn't start out and have the end envisioned with the start, with the same theme and like plot points and whatnot. It is really tough to have the finale like be satisfactory. Like even Attack on Titan, which was a phenomenal finale, people had problems with it. You cannot please anyone when you end a story.
A lot of fans saw the finale after so much excitement and hype and responded with a resounding, wait, that's it? This is largely because the way the story resolved is just kind of anticlimactic and rushed. It couldn't have actually been rushed because apparently this was in the works for years and was planned for so long, but it felt like it to people. This is partly because a lot of stuff in it kind of seems glossed over. Like, there are a lot of plot threads that never get resolved, or they're resolved off screen without ever being explained, or there are elements that don't make internal sense. For something that took years to plan and create, people just weren't expecting the very end of the comic to be one single 9-minute animation that didn't address a lot of like what happened to certain characters or even how certain important plot stuff was done. That kind of ending just didn't feel suited for the complex beast Homestuck had become. Some people disliked it so much that they theorized that this wasn't actually the end of the Homestuck comic, and the fact that it was bad meant that there would actually be more, and, well, I've done an entire video.
I remember with Stranger Things when that came out, there was this big group of people like, guys, this isn't the ending. I swear, there's gonna be more. Please,
exact same thing
there
happening
needs
in
to
Sherlock,
be more.
and it never ends well. So suffice it to say that, yes, this was actually the last part of Homestuck. Basically, some people fucking hated the finale and saw it as an unsatisfying end to the comic. On the other hand, some people really did sincerely love it for reasons beyond just nostalgia. It was kind of a return to the themes at the very beginning of Homestuck. The kids started Homestuck by playing a game, and they ended Homestuck by finally winning that game. And sure, not every single threat they faced was laid out in meticulous detail, but did it really need to be? This was a comic that emphasized fan creativity and fan imagination throughout its history, so why is it a bad thing to let fans fill in some of these gaps themselves?
Honestly, that's a really good point.
There's ambiguity in the ending where it's happy and these characters get some respite, but there are still threats out there, and it still leaves room for possible sequels and fan works and follow-up, and a lot of people really liked that. Not to mention, the animation and music sincerely were great. For many fans, it felt like a satisfying ending to Homestuck, or at least as satisfying an ending as something as big and complex as Homestuck was ever going to produce. In some ways, the controversy about
if we hit 500 likes, I'm gonna get that drink. I need to see what these drinks taste like.
The finale in the fandom was probably kind of unavoidable. Like, what's more Homestuck than fighting over whether Homestuck is good or not? And in a lot of ways, it kind of is a continuation of Collide. If you liked Collide, you'll probably like the finale. If you disliked Collide, you'll probably dislike the finale. Still, the finale was divisive even for Homestuck standards, with a lot of people coming out of it satisfied and just as many people coming out of it frustrated. But either way, whether you loved it or hated it, Homestuck was over. Andrew Hussey set out to tell a story, and after 7 years of work and money and blood and sweat and tears and fandom, it was over. Sort of. Not really.
Oh.
There's more.
Okay. Homestuck after Homestuck.
So after the ending of Homestuck, there was a lot of excitement and pressure to keep the series continuing in some way, shape, or form. Some of this was a given. After all, the Kickstarter game still hadn't been delivered, so at the very least, there was going to be one Homestuck project that was going to be released. Hussey had already announced that there would be epilogues released at some point, so fans knew that even though Homestuck was over, it wasn't really over. And that raised more questions. What ways could What Pumpkin keep the series continuing? Well, this is where Homestuck 2.0 came in. On May 9th, 2016, the official Homestuck YouTube page uploaded a video simply titled Homestuck 2.0. The video features an employee from What Pumpkin and Dante Brasco, the voice actor of Zuko from the Zutara ship, announcing the start of a new promotional plan for the series. The idea was that Homestuck 2.0 was not one specific thing, but rather the name given to the overall movement to expand the reach of Homestuck and the potential for what it could be. This would involve things like the aforementioned video game, but also live streams and community-made content that would be submitted and uploaded to the YouTube channel. Additionally, Bosco made comments both in the video and in interviews that implied they were attempting to expand Homestuck into some sort of Hollywood production, most likely a television series. And then none of this happened. The game happened, but none of the rest did. No community content was ever uploaded to the YouTube channel. No news on any productions or side projects came out. No further updates were made about the Homestuck 2.0 initiative. They didn't even end up doing any live streams or anything. Later that October, the video would be quietly taken down from the Homestuck YouTube page, and that was that. No official word on what happened or why things fell through or what the plan was now. It's very strange and very weird, and I'm not sure why they put this video out if they weren't actually prepared to, or in a stage where they would deliver literally nothing. And they still didn't have the fucking video game out.
The thing I'm learning is that Andrew he has a talent of creating media that can entice a lot of people. We're not going to downplay that. He is talented in that regard. But I feel like it's similar to what would happen if I was in charge of a project. I just wouldn't know what I'm doing. And what I would say is it's the same mistake of making promises that you don't know you can deliver. And that is a common theme, what it seems in the Homestuck community, is that they just don't know how to... They keep making promises that they can't deliver.
Around the same time that the Homestuck 2.0 video was taken down, a new trailer for Act 1 for Hiveswap was released, which showed off more gameplay and it switched to a 2D art style. It had another announced release date, this time for January 2017. But then, come January 28th, and there was an announcement that Hiveswap would be delayed for several weeks. And by several weeks, they mean that Hiveswap Act 1 would finally come out 9 months later on September 14th. And it's good. It's a good game. Totally cute, enjoyable experience. The characters are charming, and the visuals are very appealing, and the soundtrack, which was partially done by Toby Fox, is very well done. It's only a few hours long, but for $10, it's not a bad purchase at all. Plus now with Act 1 release, the wait for Act 2 shouldn't be that long, right? Like they said it would be out next spring, that's promising. Anyway, it was beginning to look like things were finally stabilizing for What Pumpkin, so it was time for another huge clusterfuck to happen. Viz Media bought Homestuck. If that sounded like it came out of nowhere, then yeah, now you know how it felt like to actually be there at the time. So if you're not aware, Viz Media is a publishing company known primarily for distributing manga in the States. Things like One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, JoJo, Dragon Ball. Wait, what does the script say? Things like One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, JoJo, Dragon Ball, all these fun series that I get to make Sarah say so that she sounds like a fucking weeb. Thanks, Emily. Thanks a lot for that. They're the largest publisher of graphic novels in the United
that's
States,
being a
accounting for
weeb.
23% of the market. Basically, they're a huge deal, which made them buying Homestuck feel even weirder. On October 6th, 2017, Viz Media put out a press release stating that they had acquired the publishing rights to Homestuck. They would be publishing new printed versions of the books starting in 2018, with digital versions also available for purchase, in case you wanted to buy a digital version of a printed version of a digital webcomic. They would also be the official publisher of hiveswap from this point forward, plus any other Homestuck related projects. They would also have control of the website, retooling it from MS Paint Adventures to homestuck.com. On the surface, it seemed like not much would change. I mean, Homestuck would be getting more print editions, that's cool, but it also had print editions before.
I don't get it. If it's animated, like, how would the print editions... I don't actually get what Homestuck is. It's a webcomic with animations involved, but then also text? Like, I don't...
The first three acts had physical copies made by Webcomic years ago. My co-writer Emily actually still has them, and the book contents are basically identical to the Viz counterparts. And Hiveswap was still going to come out and everything. Yeah, the website URL changed, but so what? That's just a website URL. It kind of sucked to see MS Paint Adventures go away since it was such an iconic brand name, but theoretically going to homestuck.com isn't too big a change. Except that this would actually be the start of breaking Homestuck as a whole, and literally breaking. Like, the site was broken. It still is in a lot of respects. The comic contained a lot of things like hyperlinks to other parts of the MSPA site, which just stopped working once the domain name was changed to homestuck.com. Like, take this part from the end of Act 6 Intermission 2, where it just doesn't let you continue at all. It redirects to a different page, and if you want to keep reading from here, you have to put in the URL for the next page yourself. There are several pages with this problem, and despite people telling them about it and chronicling all this stuff over the last few years, they still haven't been fixed. Additionally, part of Viz's plan for the Homestuck website was to get it to work on mobile. This was a huge deal, as for years you just couldn't really read Homestuck from your phone or tablet. Like, you could, but it obviously wasn't designed to be read that way and was an overall frustrating experience. So they started working on a mobile site, which meant messing with a lot of the formatting and moving things over to HTML5. And they did an okay job for the most part, but there's still some issues. Like, there's these pages in Act 6 where the fireflies are present throughout the scene, and it's a cool effect, but if you try to press on the next page button while any of the fireflies are hovering over it, it simply won't let you. Yeah, it's a minor thing, but stuff like this adds up and makes it way more annoying to read. But the biggest detriment to the website came with the death of Flash. In July of 2017, Adobe announced that in 3 years they would be ending support for Flash. This meant that anything that used Flash would just suddenly stop working. And considering Homestuck was so rooted in Flash, and I almost mean that literally, the comic was originally made entirely in Flash, this spelled worrying signs for the preservation of the comic in the long run. All these animations, minigames, interactive elements were at risk of being lost to time forever. This jump-started attempts to future-proof Homestuck to mixed results. Theoretically, it's all there. There's not stuff missing, per se, but it's definitely not great. Like, sure, some of the stuff got converted to HTML5 and still looks and feels no different than it was before. This tiny little interactive game at the start of Act 1 where John strifes his dad is still there and working. But a fair bit of things weren't given such treatment. Like, the interactive walk-around section with Carcat in Act 5 is just static images now, which, okay, like, works, but ruins a lot of the original appeal of those moments. And then there's the big Flash animations like Cascade and Descend. Those were instead replaced with embedded YouTube uploads, which theoretically is fine. These moments didn't have any interactions and are basically just long videos anyway. But the problem is that these uploads are, for some reason, ridiculously low quality. Like, some go as low as 360 pixels. They look and sound absurdly worse than their original counterpart. And it's not a YouTube-specific thing, because fans have uploaded these videos onto YouTube in much higher quality, so for some reason the official release just didn't. These may sound like small things, but when they're all added together, it really affects the comic.
And it's also because, like, the comic is long. To be honest, I don't know the exact detail on how long it is or how it's large, but I've been told that, like, getting into Homestuck is one of the biggest commitments. It's a One Piece level commitment, you know? So if there's a lot of these small problems added together, I feel like it could really impact
It
the
means that
experience.
anyone trying to get into Homestuck now will be going through a significantly worse reading experience than one would have had years ago. There are still ways to read Homestuck in its original form, the most prominent being the unofficial Homestuck collection, a free downloadable program that uses a customized browser to run all of Homestuck's assets offline and on your computer. And it's really nice that this exists, but the fact that the best way to read Homestuck is to download a fan-made preservation effort and not to just go to the officially licensed Homestuck.com website says something about the amount of care being put into the official site by Viz. Oh, and they still didn't have the fucking video game out. In spring of 2018, the period of time where they said that Act 2 of Hiveswap would drop, several high-profile members of the What Pumpkin team announced that they were parting ways with the company. This included several artists, the composers James Roach and Toby Fox, and Hiveswap's director. Shortly after, on April 8th, the What Pumpkin Tumblr announced that they were going through a restructuring period and that while Hiveswap development would continue, they were switching their focus to short-form video games that could be released more regularly. This would lead to the creation of the Friend Sim series, short dating sim-like things where each volume would focus on you meeting one of the trolls from Hiveswap and befriending them. 18 volumes of Friend Sim were released at around $1 a piece, the first one coming out on April 13th, 2018, and the last one coming out December 2018. They're relatively short, with each volume taking about 30 minutes to an hour to complete, depending on how fast you are at visual novel stuff, and generally are fun enough. I guess the thing that gets me is the idea that they even had to do this in the first place. Like, here we are, they managed to release the first act of a game that they theoretically should have started making in 2012 that was supposed to be released in 2014, and now within less than a year, the second act of the game got delayed, and they're suddenly talking about needing smaller scale, lightweight things between Hiveswap releases. And not to diminish the work put in by the Hiveswap team, because Act 1 was overall pretty good and clearly had a lot of effort put into it, but it's also not a massive, huge release. I mean, when you get down to it, it's not really that. The first act of Hiveswap took me about 2 hours to beat, and I was really trying to explore as much as I could and see any possible dialogue option or clickable thing I could point and click on. It was fun, and it was cute, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't a complete game, nor did it feel like it had the same level of content as, say, Undertale, which was fundraised, made, and released in half the amount of time as just the first act of Hiveswap. The whole point of having an episodic structure in the first place, both in Hiveswap and just in general, is that you can release the game in spurts without making fans wait through the long developmental process. But now you're telling me that you need episodic releases of small-scale games in order to help fans wait through the episodic release.
You're watching, by the way, please drink some water or something. Hydrate yourself.
Of small-scale games, and after all those earlier production issues, after finally managing to get one part of the game out, suddenly What Pumpkin and Hiveswap are going through production retooling again? There's also the question of credits. Basically, when Act 1 of Hiveswap came out, a lot of the credits for the game were just completely missing. No one who did work for Hiveswap any time before they fired the NYC team is credited for the game at all, even though, like, some of their work is almost certainly used in the game, even with the shift from 3D to 2D. So that's a thing, and it sets a bad tone. Then, when Act 2 of Hiveswap came out, fans were surprised to notice that there were just no credits on it for any of the team members.
Yeah, I guess that solves the problem.
The team later announced that the people who worked on the game wouldn't be credited in order to avoid them being harassed, which is just what? I spoke to someone who knows a lot of official Homestuck creators pretty well, and the impression I get is that this was less out of maliciousness and more out of incompetence. Like, they seemed to think they were genuinely doing the right thing and protecting their team from harassment. They weren't doing it to be evil, but it was still a really bad move and was quickly met with backlash from the fans. They pretty quickly announced that they would add the credits later via a patch, and so 3 days after the release of Hiveswap Act 2, they released a patch adding in the credits. Side note, but Drill, like the Twitter user Drill, was one of the writers for Hiveswap, and the release of the credits led to people learning his real name and identity. Nothing too spicy there, he's just a dude, but the Drill Homestuck connection was wild to a lot of people. But this credit mess and the weird time frame and repeated development problems really go to show that Hiveswap, and really What Pumpkin as a whole, seem to be incredibly mismanaged. In the time it took to release Act 2, not only were they able to release 18 volumes of Friend Sim, but they were able to release 14 volumes of a sequel to Friendsim called Pester Quest, which was essentially the same thing, but instead used characters that appeared in the actual Homestuck comic. We wouldn't get the first teaser trailer for Act 2 until October 31st, 2019, and then the game itself wouldn't come out until November 16th, 2020. This is over 3 years since Act 1 was released and 8 years since the Kickstarter itself. Reminder that Hiveswap still has 2 more acts to go and apparently a sequel series of games. There is a very real possibility that it'll take them over 10 years to finish delivering what they promised with that original Kickstarter.
Or should I wait for it to
speaking of things
come out?
taking forever to come out, remember those epilogues?
Oh yes, the epilogue for Homestuck.
So, in 2019, 3 years after Homestuck's official ending, and on the 10th anniversary of the series, fans were surprised by the release of the long-awaited Homestuck epilogues. While these were originally planned to be released only as a book published by Viz, the decision was made to upload the first 3 chapters online on April 13th and upload the rest a week later. After all this time and anticipation, there was finally more official mainline Homestuck content out there, and the fandom took it, So there are a few things that are worth knowing about the epilogues.
Okay.
One, unlike the rest of Homestuck, they're entirely a written work, with no artwork to be found, simply conventional narration text accompanied by the usual chat logs one would expect from Homestuck. The entire thing is formatted to resemble a fanfic, to the point where the opening page of them replicates the layout of AO3. 2, this was the first mainline Homestuck project where Hussey wasn't the sole writer, or even the primary writer. While he gave an outline for the story, a team of other writers were responsible for most of it. 3, they're long.
That's not good.
In total, the epilogues are 190,398 words long. For comparison, the original comic was around 800,000 words total. 4, the epilogues are split down 2 different routes, meat and candy. Both feature dramatically different events and tell wildly different stories. Both are just as canon as the other. 5, they're depressing as hell and not what a lot of fans wanted.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the central mission statement around the epilogue seems to be examining the concept of canon and the idea of what an ending to Homestuck should even look like. Thus, the epilogues have been described as dubiously canon. They are an official Homestuck release, yes, but whether or not they're actually the official continuation is, well, dubious. This is further emphasized by the fact that they do focus on 2 different timelines, meat and candy. The fact that even the epilogues don't give you one definite explanation for which plotline is the real one that matters means that fans get to decide which version of Homestuck's epilogue they prefer to be true.
I'll be honest.
Meat, candy, or none. This was also done to encourage fans to have their own fun with Homestuck and its world. The series has always been defined heavily by its community, be it the existence of the original suggestion box literally changing aspects of the story, or if it was the popularity of fan adventures and fan trolls and original universe stories. It can be said that, for a while, the world and culture of Homestuck has existed far beyond what—
Okay, I will say Andrew Hussey has received not received a lot of hate, but it's been spun in quite a negative light, this video, in some regard. Don't get me wrong. That's not the creator's fault, it's just like through actions and whatnot. They've made a lot of mistakes. However, I mean, 3 years, you're expecting a lot of content. And in that regard, they did deliver, so I gotta give him the flowers. I mean, yes, he didn't write it all, or majority of it, but it still outlined what he envisioned, so I gotta give him his flowers in that regard.
Whatever Hussey managed to come up with and put into the comic himself. So by presenting a story with 2 very different possible routes and 2 very different open endings, it could theoretically open the door for fans to explore these concepts in their own way and make their own version of what they imagine the Homestuck story to look like. And fans hated it. Quality of the epilogues aside, let's really look at the meat of the problem here, or the candy of the problem here, you choose. The fan base who wanted the epilogues didn't want a springboard to create their own canon. They didn't want something this existential and something this unconventional and out of it. The people who wanted the epilogues wanted them because they wanted to see more elaboration on Homestuck's ending and wanted to see the characters they loved get closure and finish up their arcs. This isn't to say they all wanted a sweet, simple, candy ending, they just wanted ending, and the epilogues didn't provide that, instead making the story more complicated, depriving most of the cast of happy endings, and turning some fan favorites straight up evil. From the fan perspective, they weren't given 3 exciting options to determine their own take on the story. They were given 3 lackluster options that all provided no real closure. And, well, that was it. Homestuck was over. Like, over. The comic had its official ending, and now it had its semi-official epilogue. Sure, it left a sour taste in people's mouths, and there was a lot of dissatisfaction,
Seems to be a lot of
dissatisfaction, but at least the saga of Homestuck was closed. And for the most part, while later parts were divisive, fan opinions still seemed to view Homestuck as overall pretty good. Though you may be wondering, if Homestuck is so good, why is there no Homestuck 2? On October 25th, 2019, fans were taken by surprise by the release of a new comic called Homestuck 2. Well, okay, technically called Homestuck 2 Beyond Canon, but let's be real, it's called Homestuck 2.
Is this the Dante Brasco one? Or the thing they're talking about, 2.0?
It launched at the same time as a new website and an official Homestuck Patreon. The Homestuck Twitter even announced it by simply saying, "Surprise, bitch," and just linking to the website, though they've since deleted the post for some reason. So, okay.
What?
This was unexpected. People knew the epilogues were coming. They had years to prepare for them and then a few months to be angry at them. That's fine. But a full-fledged sequel seemed to be out of the question. And when this was announced, there was a lot of excitement.
I can imagine. Dude, that's crazy.
The series was illustrated again, and the suggestion box was returning. That hadn't been around in ages. Sure, there was a fair bit of concern over whether or not Homestuck should be put to rest, but going back and looking at the announcement, there was a definite excitement there for the project and for the series to continue. Let's try to break down exactly what Homestuck 2 is. According to the series' now deleted FAQ page, Homestuck is, by all accounts, an official fanonization. By this, they mean that Homestuck 2 was a webcomic made by former fans of Homestuck, specifically by a studio known as Snake Solution Studios LLP, which had been producing over 80 episodes of a weekly Homestuck podcast. However, it was also conceived and produced by What Pumpkin and Andrew Hussey, thus giving it some form of officiality. The plot was based on an outline provided to them by Hussey, and it would directly follow the epilogues and theoretically provide some closure to the plots for both the meat and candy timelines introduced in them. It's worth noting that Homestuck 2 wasn't funded by Viz Media, despite the rest of Homestuck and the epilogues and related projects.
I don't get the legality of this, because if Viz Media own Homestuck 2's IP, like, must use IP from Homestuck. So, like, how much do Viz Media own, and then how much, you know what I mean?
By them. Instead, Homestuck 2 was to be funded entirely by the new Homestuck Patreon. Homestuck 2 would update once a month, however, if the Patreon achieved over 2,000 patrons, which, let's be real, should be an easy task for Homestuck, it's Homestuck, there would be an extra update each month. Beyond that, patrons would get access to exclusive bonus content and comics that would expand the world of Homestuck 2 and explore more of its characters. This was all very cool and exciting, and there was a lot of hype and buzz and interest, and then Homestuck 2 was bad. It's bad. Well, I'm sorry, but it's really bad. I'm trying to be nice here, but I really don't like it. Homestuck 2
dude,
is
they cannot
bad.
get a win.
I don't want to kick a project boss
so
down,
sad.
and as you'll soon learn, Homestuck 2 is very, very down, but I have to be honest when I say that I have read all of Homestuck 2 and just found it not very good. Like, it's not even an issue of the plot of Homestuck 2 or whatever, because Homestuck 2 doesn't really have a plot. Nothing has happened. It's a comic that has run for 400 pages for over a year, and barely any plot progression has taken place. This is already a bad sign, as the original Homestuck was known for its fast-moving and frantic and batshit plot, and the fact that Homestuck 2 hasn't really replicated that is a huge...
Can you please subscribe so we can afford to buy a bottle of each of these flavors to try? I'll take a short out of it.
And that's not to say that it's bad that Homestuck 2 isn't exactly like the original Homestuck. It's okay for sequels to deviate from the tone of the original, but this weird dissonance is especially an issue because of how they branded Homestuck 2 as a return to form compared to the epilogues, how the suggestion box and drawings and all that would be back. And this discrepancy between what was advertised and what Homestuck 2 actually was is even further reinforced by the fact that they abandoned the suggestion box almost immediately after implementing it. Like, it existed on one singular update.
It's so bad.
Suffice it to say, despite the branding that this was going to be closer to the style of actual Homestuck than its epilogues just in terms of how the story was told, it just wasn't that on a lot of levels. In terms of the pacing, the main meat of Homestuck 2 is spent mostly on characters just talking about their feelings, talking about what's going on, talking about what they plan on doing, lots and lots of talking.
Okay, so earlier in this video I talked about how what makes a really great piece of media is character relationships and resonating with characters, and using plot to drive that. Using plot to drive that is the important thing. Of course, relating to a character and stuff is really important and key, but you need plot to push the characters to do stuff. You need it's a symbiotic relationship. You need one. You can't just rely on one without the other.
Here's the thing. I don't
when you
mind
lack one, it
stories that
makes a
consist
really
largely of
big
characters
difference.
having conversations. Some of the greatest pieces of media are just people having conversations. Look at, I don't know, My Dinner with Andre or No Exit. Talking isn't bad, but the dialogue in Homestuck 2 doesn't really serve to deepen our understanding of these characters or allow for interesting things to happen to them. It's just seemingly there to fill space. Sometimes the talking consists of lame, jokey, ship bait exchanges that feel right at home in those incorrect quotes blogs on Tumblr. Like, look at this exchange and tell me it doesn't flat out look like it could be from a parody quote blog where they just take quotes from other shows and put Homestuck characters' names in them for the memes. Sometimes it's long-winded talks where the characters just say different variations of, hey, I'm feeling sad over and over again. And sometimes it's melodramatic meta-commentary ramblings of someone like Dirk, who is theoretically the main villain of Homestuck 2. If I had to compare the writing of
Dirk is
Homestuck
such a
2 to
bad
anything,
name. I'm
it's
sorry if your
season 4
name
of
Dirk.
Community. Here, you have the continuation of a cult favorite
Is that
series
Community?
now overseen by a different staff of people. People who hold the original work in such high regard and are so afraid of potentially deviating from it or upsetting the fan base that their direction seems to be to try to replicate the voice and style of the original writer to the point of it just feeling hollow and shallow and unappealing. Characters are flanderized to such basic caricatures of themselves just so that you
I really love this TV show, by the way. Community is so
know
good.
it's them and can feel like you're seeing them in their iconic fan-preferred state. Plot lines get a lot shallower and more focused on providing cool fan service moments rather than actually making sense or continuing the arc of the story. It's just flat. Very, very flat and uninteresting. The type of writing that makes you question if you ever even liked the series in the first place. All this would be fine if Homestuck 2 had any real form of plot
few
progression,
shots of
or if at the
Community.
very least its update schedule was faster.
does get a little
While
worse as it goes
Hussey
on.
admits that his work
I'll
ethic
admit it.
on the early parts of Homestuck
A
was
little.
unhealthy and unsustainable and shouldn't be repeated, and quite honestly, yeah, he's right, the fact that Homestuck 2 was coming out only once and then eventually twice a month just made these non-important sections feel like filler. It made keeping up with Homestuck 2 feel tedious. Also, the art in Homestuck 2 is... well, for the most part, it's good, fine, gets the job done,
Fine.
but it's also
That's how you
way
wanna
more
describe
of a
a
mixed
piece of
bag than
media.
the original was. Like,
It's fine.
just for starters, you have the fact that despite the characters theoretically being 30 years older, most of the cast uses their exact same designs and sprites from the original Homestuck, which makes it very weird when they're placed next to their children that are supposed to be 15 years old. And then there's moments that are just straight up bad. Like, Homestuck was always designed to look a bit shitty, like, well, an MS Paint illustration, but it was never actually bad. Meanwhile, there are moments in Homestuck 2 that just look bad. Like, look at this leg. Look at this table. Fucking look at this table. The more you look at it, the worse it gets. And related to that, one of the strangest directorial choices in Homestuck 2 was the decision to not have the elaborate animations or really any interactive elements at all. Places where you would typically see a huge animated set piece were instead portrayed via simple written narration very similar to the epilogues. So far in Homestuck 2, there's only been 2 S-labeled panels. One is just the words TikTok repeating over and over again, and the other is a short little animation of a rocket taking off. Neither of them last longer than a few seconds, and neither of them have music, even though Homestuck 2 has an official soundtrack that you can pay real-world money to buy. This is really bizarre because a big reason why Homestuck blew up in the first place was because of those big elaborate flash scenes. Like, don't get me wrong, Homestuck is more than just epic orchestrated animations. But when
Yeah.
you're trying to get someone into Homestuck, you're not showing them the long chat logs or moments where John puts his fake arms into a cake. You're showing them Cascade or playing Megalovania for them. You're showing them all the cool hype shit that can be found in what's supposed to just be a simple webcomic, and you can't really do that with Homestuck 2. Apparently, the reason for this was just that they couldn't do animation with their budget and staff and schedule, which, okay, fair enough, that stuff is hard to do and takes a lot of time. But once again, while Hussey's schedule and output was unhealthy and shouldn't be replicated, it's very strange that an entire team of people, now being paid via Patreon and releasing only 1 to 2 updates every month, were unable to replicate replicate even somewhat similar
really
results to a
point.
single person working mostly by himself and updating almost daily. Like, I'm not saying they should have crunched or overworked themselves. I'm just saying it's weird that increasing the budget and number of people working on Homestuck seemingly made the production value go down. And let's go back to that Patreon because I think it's very important. So the idea of Homestuck 2 Beyond Canon is that it continues the theme that the epilogue started of challenging the idea of what is or isn't canon. This theme doesn't seem to really be explored throughout the work itself, to be honest, at least not yet. Like, Dirk alludes to it in some of his monologues, but really the meat and candy sections of Homestuck 2 operate just totally normally, working concurrently, very similar to how the original Homestuck would play with differing timelines. But from a creative standpoint, the concept of canon was a big deal. A lot was made about the fact that Homestuck 2 wasn't technically considered an official continuation, but rather beyond canon. Except this element doesn't quite work out for a variety of reasons. For starters, advertising the series as being overseen by Hussie and based on Hussie's outline is automatically going to give it a semi-official status that's unavoidable, no matter what anyone says. This is something even the original FAQ seems to acknowledge. It would be like saying this Star Wars project isn't necessarily canon, but George Lucas wrote the plot and oversaw the project, and Lucasfilm is promoting it and funding it. There's a lot of power and perception that comes from being tied to the original creators of the original work. But beyond that, we also have to look at the Patreon. On the surface, this Patreon seems to be specifically for Homestuck 2. It's the only project listed in the description. All the benefits and rewards tie solely into Homestuck 2 related content. All of the bonus content and stories uploaded to it take place in Homestuck 2's universe and are produced by Homestuck 2's team. And yet the title of the Patreon isn't Homestuck 2, is it? It's just Homestuck. And less than a month after the Patreon started, they released a public update that included this quote from Hussie.
The point of the Patreon wasn't only to fund HS Squared. There are dozens of people working on Homestuck games and projects, and almost all of them came from the fandom originally. So they're spread across everything we're doing, like hiveswap, FriendSim, PesterQuest, and now HS Squared, contributing art, writing, music, and programming. The Patreon is a good way for fans who love what they're doing to contribute to their overall compensation outside of game sales alone. The better the Patreon does, not only does everyone at the studio benefit, but the more you'll see HS Squared start to pick up the pace.
On its surface, this is a fine statement.
Yeah.
Yes, it's cool for the money from the Patreon to be used to fund Homestuck things, but this isn't a Patreon for hiveswap or FriendSim or PesterQuest. This is a Patreon for Homestuck 2. And so what this means is that even if you don't like Homestuck 2, even if you don't think that Homestuck 2 is canon, even if you want to argue that it's just a fan project, there's an incentive there to support the creation of Homestuck 2. After all, the better Homestuck 2 does, the better the Patreon does, and the better the Patreon does, the more likely things like Hiveswap, which still hadn't released Act 2 at this time, by the way, would get extra funds that could help it be completed. Depending on your view of what Pumpkin and Homestuck as a whole, this could be seen as a very cynical move, using something as eye-catching and attention-grabbing like something called Homestuck 2 to generate extra funding and interest to the other projects that What Pumpkin wanted to create. I don't believe that's entirely true, as it does seem like Homestuck 2 was initially a passion project for those involved, but it definitely doesn't look good. Homestuck 2 managed to run for half a year without issue. Okay, well, when I say without issue, I mean that there weren't any big over-the-top scandals. There were issues in the sense that there was a growing sense of backlash toward the comic and dislike of its pace and storytelling and everything. But I mean, that wasn't anything new. Homestuck had always had a passionate fan base, so them being disappointed or disapproving of the series or the plot wasn't anything unexpected or unique. But over time, the backlash to Homestuck 2 seemed to be growing more and more, culminating in the April 13th, 2020 update, which introduced readers to the existence of Yiffy.
Yiffy?
Oh, Yiffy. Oh boy. I don't even know how to begin. Okay, it's explained that sometime in the backstory of Homestuck 2, the character of Jade really wanted a child. This couldn't be achieved through her, Dave, and Karkat for a variety of reasons, and they weren't able to adopt because of racist laws that discouraged interspecies relationships between trolls and humans. So Jade instead decided to ask her friend Rose to be a surrogate mother. They decided to do this without telling Rose's partner, Kanaya, for 15 years. Which is Yeah, Kanaya seems weirdly okay with this, despite literally just now finding out that her partner has lied to her about having a child for over a decade. And the reason why Jade and Rose are able to conceive a child together is because Jade has partially fused with a dog, meaning she has canine DNA and a canine... Yeah, it's an interesting choice. But that's how we ended up with the partially dog child known as Yiffany Longstalking Lalonde Harley, or just Yiffy for short. Fan opinion on Yiffy is divisive. Like, probably not on the same levels as Vriska, because, well, Homestuck 2 just isn't as popular as Homestuck was. But for a lot of fans, Yiffy just represented a lot of what was wrong with Homestuck 2. Here was this character whose existence makes two pre-established fan favorite characters look significantly worse, whose role in the story so far was meaningless compared to the importance placed on her. All she's done so far is get kidnapped, refuse to eat food out of a dog bowl, and then get shock collared, whose design seems more like a nostalgia critic persona, and her fucking name is Yiffy. And let's talk about the whole dog reproduction thing, because it ties into something very important with late era Homestuck and its fan base. As the series has progressed into the epilogues and video games and sequel comics, one of the most notable things about it is the increase in focus on gender. So before we get into all of this, I should clarify that I'm saying this all as a cisgender woman, yes, though as a cis woman reciting the words of my transgender woman co-writer who I gave a pay raise to because I made her write about transgender issues in Yiffy for me. Send your hate mail and discourse to @GreatCheshire. She's entirely the one to blame for this. All right, so there's been a significant increase in trans and gender non-conforming characters. Because of Homestuck's large and widely beloved cast, however, most of these efforts come in the form of applying these attributes to previously established characters. Sometimes this can be blatant, like the character of Roxy, who goes by different pronouns depending on which story route you go down in the epilogue. Other times it can be subtext, such as the Pester Quest game, leaving a lot of hints that Vriska is trans to the point where the fanbase and the author of said Pester Quest route accept it as canon. And then there's June Egbert and the Toblerone thing. In late 2019, Andrew Hussie started something that I guess can best be described as an ARG where he hid a bunch of signed Toblerones around the world. Toblerones were chosen because of this viral image of Hussie standing in front of a cave holding a Toblerone with the caption, "Motherfucking cave." After the first set of Toblerones was found, Hussie hid even more and kind of jokingly declared that whoever found the Toblerones would get to make a request that would affect Homestuck canon. The first of these requests was to make June Egbert, the interpretation of protagonist John Egbert as a trans woman, canon. June was one of the more popular fan interpretations at the time, and so when Hussie responded to it by saying, "It will be done," it caught a lot of people off guard and raised some attention. There hasn't been much official verification of June beyond this, with the exception of an Easter egg of Rose painting John's nails in Volume 4 of Pester Quest and some lines in Homestuck 2 that could imply that the story is heading in the direction of John doing some gender questioning. Still, the fact that something like this is even a possibility, that the original starting protagonist of Homestuck could be revealed to be canonically a trans woman based on a Toblerone fan quest, is super, super fascinating. As you can imagine, the response to these sorts of developments has been mixed. Like, even beyond the fact that Homestuck's fanbase is simply unpleasable and any sort of change has the chance to rile them up, this is something that comes up a lot when people talk about the later elements of Homestuck, and it's something that people have issues with. To give a generous interpretation of fan concerns regarding this, taking previously established and known characters and writing them as trans years after the fact can all feel very retcon-y for some people.
That is true. I think, like, the problem is that when people have built these relationships with characters, making such a big change can feel like you're taking away the character, that they can view it as taking it away, which it's not, you know, like, it's change. People change over time, you know, things change, but people are really scared of change, you know, especially with things that are really important.
Technically counts as a retcon or not. Like, when a character who has existed for over 10 years has suddenly been declared trans because fans want it or because a new creative team has taken over, does that suddenly equal good representation or storytelling? Especially if the story doesn't actually set to tackle or cover a lot of the struggles that come from discovering your gender or how it plays into your relationship with the world and those around you, because, well, that was never something the story thought to focus on. Not that all stories featuring trans or gender nonconforming characters need to focus on gender or gender struggles, but rather, I guess, it's the question of if learning whether or not Vriska is trans actually affects the story of Homestuck and makes for good representation. I guess the thing is whether or not these retroactive confirmations regarding gender identity feel empowering and impactful to the story, or do they serve as ticking boxes for representation and headcanons? Like, when I find out that Jade has canine AMAB genitalia, I, as a cis woman reciting the words of a trans woman who wrote this part, don't feel empowered or represented. I just feel like, oh, that's, And I think that it ties into a lot of the issues that fans were starting to have with Homestuck 2 as a whole. While, as previously established, the community had always been important, as more and more Homestuck projects began to come out with more and more involvement from people other than Hussie, it started to feel like the students were running the school. Like, to certain groups of people who were having issues with choices like that and the direction entirely, Homestuck was starting to feel less like an original series and more like an outlet for fan service. You could argue against this by
you could say, maybe actually, let me see what point they
saying that
make.
controversial decisions like Yiffy and her backstory were part of Hussie's original outline for Homestuck 2 and something he considered non-negotiable, but for these people, that's not necessarily a huge comfort because...
Okay, my thing is that Homestuck started off as a community-involved thing at the first place. So, like, these changes and stuff being made by the community is in its essence what Homestuck is. So, like, you can't discredit it too much.
Because it goes just beyond who's literally coming up with what ideas and more of the general presentation of Homestuck as a franchise. What once was a fresh and innovative series was starting to feel more and more like an insiders-only thing that cared solely about pandering to the base that already existed rather than trying to expand what Homestuck could be and what it could do. There are also fans who disagreed with the creative direction solely because they dislike trans people and didn't want to see characters they like be trans or see any trans people in Homestuck. And, you know, fuck that. Fuck transphobes and fuck transphobia. If your primary issue with Homestuck 2 is simply that you don't like the existence of trans characters in it, or a character being revealed to be trans makes you think less of them simply because they're trans, then fuck off. And if you're so bothered by the existence of trans characters in your online webcomic that you feel the need to harass the creators behind said webcomic, especially trans creators, then you can absolutely fuck off too. That shit is not okay. There are a lot of issues with Homestuck 2 and the way it handles representation, but to act as if it's the existence of trans characters or even LGBT characters in general is the problem isn't gonna get anywhere, nor is it gonna produce anything healthy. It's fine to critique this stuff, I certainly have in this video, but if the root of your problem is just that a character is trans, well, you're missing the fundamentals of the issue and just sort of being a shitty person. And especially if you feel the need to harass the creative team about it. And of course, people started harassing the creative team about it. This part of the story is honestly pretty divisive and hostile and fresh. We're talking drama that's less than a year old with a lot of conflicting viewpoints on the cause of it, who is in the right, who is in the wrong, were the actions of the creative team at fault, were the actions of the fans at fault, a bunch of shit back and forth, and it's messy. And it caused a lot of drama that left a lot of people personally affected, and it's probably for the best to just not really cover the specifics of it deeply. This video isn't about the personal lives of the creators, but about the actual Homestuck properties themselves and how people responded to them. I want to focus on that. So here's what you need to know. On May 21st, 2020, it was announced that Homestuck 2 would be going on hiatus for the month of June. And then at the end of June,
I feel like it must be like Vietnam flashbacks whenever you hear the word hiatus and Homestuck
2's creative director announced that she was leaving the project and no longer interacting with fans. A few days after that, it was announced that Homestuck 2 wouldn't be back until August, meaning Homestuck 2 would be going on a 2-month hiatus. So things were basically like the original Homestuck now. It should also be noted that around this time, other creatives and directors and artists on Homestuck 2 were beginning to leave the project as well, leaving it in a very not good state. During the summer hiatus, emails between Hussie and a moderator on the Homestuck subreddit leaked, which made fans view Hussie in a negative light. These leaks are what's more than likely responsible for the Patreon losing over 100 patrons in a single day, which is very much not a normal thing to have happen, and ended up kickstarting the trend of Homestuck 2's Patreon gradually losing patrons over time. It only took a few months for Homestuck's Patreon to dip below 2,000 patrons, meaning the update schedule ended up getting halved very shortly after coming back from its first hiatus. The idea of a Homestuck Patreon having less than 2,000 patrons is buck wild to me. Like, you may be asking, well, is 1,800 patrons a lot? And that really depends on the context. For an independent YouTuber, yes. For the sequel to one of the most popular webcomics ever, no. Like, yeah, 1,800 patrons is not a number to scoff at. That's still a lot of people. That's nearly 3 times as many patrons as I have. But just think about how a Homestuck Patreon would have performed in, say, 2012, back when the Kickstarter managed to raise $2.5 million.
Yeah.
It's a sign that there was a growing trend of disinterest at best, dissatisfaction at worst. This can also be seen in the way the series was interacted with on Twitter. Twitter is a hell site meant to cater to everyone's worst sensibilities, but even this was bizarre. Posts announcing next chapters of Homestuck 2 would receive responses like trying to get them ratioed by posting the Team Fortress 2 engineer, people critiquing them for not having Hiveswap Act 2 released yet, or people actually seeming to be disappointed that Homestuck 2 updated at all. Not the content of the updates themselves, just the fact that updates for it even existed. A fan base that was once so excited for new updates that they would crash websites were suddenly mad at the idea of anything new being uploaded at all.
Sad.
That's wow. It got to the point where later posts from the Homestuck account just wouldn't allow replies at all. And that's understandable considering the massive amounts of hate and harassment the team was getting, but still, geez. Like, the most recent update hasn't even been posted to Twitter at all. They just really don't want to be engaged with on that platform. Homestuck 2 would keep on keeping on until December 25th, 2020. December 25th being an important day in Homestuck lore. After this, the team would announce that they were going on hiatus again and there would be no update for January. What's weird is that this was an update that finally introduced an actual plot into things, with the idea being that they'd have to fix the timelines by taking the chosen character into the giant black hole called the plot point, and this all sounds familiar. But anyway, yeah, the team would be breaking for January with the promise that they'd be back in February. And they were, kind of. Not really. On February 11th, Andrew Hussey put out a written statement on the Patreon that the Patreon would be shut down and wouldn't allow any new patrons nor charge any old ones. Said statement was originally made public, but for some reason, days later was set so that only patrons could see it, which is weird considering that you couldn't, like, become a patron anymore, but whatever. The meat of this update is that Homestuck 2 would be going through a radical change. Instead of being funded by the Patreon and updated gradually, it would be paid for entirely through private commission and released all at once when it was done. The reason for this, as cited by Hussey, is the fan backlash and how it led to ongoing harassment and abuse given toward the original staff of the comic, specifically the members of the staff who are transgender or people of color. And, well, that's that. A few weeks later, Snake Solution Studios LLP, the original team behind Homestuck 2, shut down. Rumors regarding who is still involved in Homestuck...
I don't get how you could be a fan of this kind of media and be, like, racist and homophobic and transphobic. It makes no sense to me.
Homestuck 2 and who
it's
have
like
left
Undertale and
are all
Deltron
abound.
fans. They're
There hasn't
transphobic
been any
Deltron
official
fans.
word on when Homestuck 2 will come back or any other future for the franchise just in general. I will say this. In my opinion, the odds of Homestuck 2 finishing are slim. According to the original creative team, they foresaw their vision of Homestuck 2 running for years and years. And considering the pace of the story and how little happened just in 1 year of updates, how it feels like the inciting incident was just now happening, it doesn't seem like Homestuck 2 is in a state that it can easily wrap up soon. Finishing up Homestuck 2 is going to require a team of creatives working privately to create hundreds more, if not thousands more pages. And considering how this series was seemingly already bleeding creative talent, plus the toxicity the project is now infamous for, getting people on board and ready to work is going to be a challenge itself. And keep in mind, this is theoretically the same company and the same brand that has taken almost 10 years to release half a video game. I don't necessarily associate What Pumpkin and the Homestuck creative team with timeliness anymore. Even if Homestuck 2 does eventually get finished and does eventually come out, it more than likely will be years from now. And, well, considering how little enthusiasm and impact Homestuck 2 is leaving on people after 1 year of updates, I can't imagine there will be a lot of fans who excitedly pick up the rest of Homestuck 2 in 5 years once it's all over. So, yeah, for now, this is how the story of Homestuck 2 ends.
Oh, God.
Not with a bang, but just a whimper. A really, really sad whimper.
Jesus.
I guess in some ways, Homestuck 2 is like this Faygo. You know, it started out kind of good and sweet, and now I've been drinking it for 5 hours of filming, and I don't like it anymore.
Epilogue.
There are a lot of things that even a video as ridiculously long as this didn't get to touching on. There's Hussey turning into an e-boy on Instagram and just some of his trolling antics in general.
Okay.
There's the controversy surrounding Andrew Hussey's co-writer Cohen on hiveswap. There's all the different fandoms ex-Homestuck fans migrated to, like Danganronpa and Steven Universe in 17776, which is great, by the way.
I don't know what
There's
that
the
is.
official music albums and the music work for Homestuck in general. There's some of the most famous fan fictions and Homestuck parodies and stuff like Stuck, and suffice it to say, it's pretty much
Kesha,
impossible to
the
cover
musician?
every single thing that was big in the entire history of the fandom because there was just so much of everything. But what I think is interesting here is just to look at the big picture, at what Homestuck and its fandom really were, what they represented, what made them so unique, especially looking back on it all over a decade after it started. There's something very strange about Homestuck, and I don't mean strange in the sense that, like, its plot involves the Nick Cage bunny from Con Air and Barack Obama's ghost and Betty Crocker. No, I mean strange in that it's just such
What?
a weird phenomenon. Like, in a lot
Obama's
of ways,
ghost.
something like
He's
this
not
could
dead.
never happen
That'd be
again,
a sad
right?
day.
Homestuck was this strange, very personal, independent project that utilized the internet not just as an outlet for content distribution, but as a medium itself, a vehicle that could be used to influence the presentation and expression and direction of the series. It got this cult-like fan base who obsessed over it, frantically rereading it and immersing themselves in this hard-to-explain niche webcomic. And the nature of Homestuck, how it reflects a certain era of the internet age, makes it something that can never truly be replicated, even by itself.
Yeah.
Andres
Oh,
Amador is an
1000%. I
artist
don't think
living
you
in
can
San
replicate anything
Francisco, and
close
his
to
art
Homestuck.
largely revolves around beautiful, complex patterns drawn into sand on San Francisco beaches. If you look at his art, it's incredible. Geometric patterns that are so precise that it's amazing that one guy in his human hand drew them. Complicated, mesmerizing series of lines where you're like, it's amazing that this existed in your head like this. Landscapes so much bigger than one person. And every day, just a few hours after he makes these gorgeous pieces of art, the
Gone.
ocean washes them away and the beach just looks like a beach again. He knows this when he makes them. The people who love his art know it. And in a way, its temporary nature is kind of the point. In Amador's words, the entire act becomes a meditation on being in the moment, of celebrating and being at peace with life and death.
Pretty
When I
beautiful.
look at
I like that a
Homestuck
lot.
as a whole, the way it started and the way it ended, it really feels to me like a sand drawing on a beach. Flash is dead. Pages upon pages of the comic are completely broken now. Homestuck can never be experienced now the way it could be back in the day. Attempts have been made to save parts of it, and someone who is reading the comic completely from scratch nowadays could probably still get an enjoyable experience out of it, but Homestuck at its height can just never exist in the same way that it used to ever again.
That's
the other day,
not what you want to hear as someone who is looking to getting into Homestuck now, I'll be honest.
I learned that Yahoo Answers was going to get shut down. It just wasn't profitable enough anymore. All these questions and this massive resource of people that was sometimes helpful and sometimes hilarious and sometimes terrible is just gonna vanish. People will archive as much as they can, but then that's it. Things like Flash and Yahoo Answers to me really represent the internet in its Wild West days, for better or for worse. And as frustrated as I am with the fact that if anything on the internet wants to exist now, it has to be tied to profit generation somehow,
Yeah.
I think that this all really goes to show that everything we take for granted on here is a lot less stable than we might think it is. We build these sand pictures and draw thousands upon thousands of lines,
That's
and
a
we
really
have to
good way
remember
of
to
looking at it.
appreciate them while they're here, because one day they just won't be anymore. The period of Homestuck's existence isn't ongoing. It was massive and complex, but it was fleeting. I won't say Homestuck was unambiguously good all the time. It very much wasn't, for a lot of reasons. Besides the elements of the story that were just hashtag problematic, there were also a lot of cases of poor storytelling or weak characterization or just not amazing writing throughout. Not to mention, the stuff we
I feel
now
like that
know
makes him
about
more
how Andrew
human,
Hussey
though,
tends to
you
run
know?
businesses makes me think less favorably on Homestuck as a broader collective enterprise. But at the same time, Homestuck was something really unique. It was huge and creative and sometimes beautiful and complex, and that's marked not only by the work itself, but also the culture that sprung up around it. Again, that culture wasn't always good. I think I've made that pretty clear in my video.
Yeah.
But that culture was this huge collective thing that can just never happen again. It's a place full of thousands upon thousands of art pieces and animatics and songs. A place where people were so dedicated to Homestuck they'd give tens of thousands of dollars to die in its comic. The culture of Homestuck was terrifying at times because it was big and chaotic, but it was also this uniquely collective thing. And now that Homestuck is over, and now that it can just never exist again the way it used to, the same is true for its fan culture. The wave has washed over the beach. Homestuck truly is over. I think that's what makes the epilogues in Homestuck 2 such a fascinating thing to me. If Homestuck was a big, complex piece of art that's gotten washed away to sea, Homestuck 2 is like if someone tried to draw in the sand while there was still water on the shore. It's trying to keep making art past the times where that artwork can sustain itself or even be relevant. And at the end of the day, it makes you frustrated that you even thought to make art in the sand in the first place. At some point, you have to just accept that the tide is too high and it's time to move on to something else, lest you have the entire experience tainted with frustration and disappointment and terrible sandcastles. It's a shame that this is how Homestuck's story ends, that this is what we have to close this out on. Because it would be nice to talk about Homestuck as this great nostalgic thing of the past, this work of internet legend from yesteryear. But instead, the conversation around Homestuck is just this tired old franchise that seems to keep getting dragged into increasingly controversial spin-off projects by a creative team that seems to be, in the best of words, very, very mismanaged. But I think now, even after all this drama, the buyouts, the dropped works, the controversial story choices, the everything, there is still something there to admire about Homestuck. Whether that's as a part of internet history or a piece of media that you still hold dear, there's definitely something there still worth remembering. And I'll raise my Fago to that. Fans of Homestuck really love this story with irreverent humor and absurd lore that starts with the world being destroyed and follows our every-person protagonists into a delightful space adventure. If you're looking for something similar that's accessible and timeless, I'm always proud to recommend The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's iconic, and it's managed to stick around as a staple of humorous sci-fi literature for decades for good reason. If you're interested in listening to it, you can easily do so with my sponsor, Audible. Audible is a great... If you're interested in exploring Audible and checking out Audio Z to 5...
That was a really good video. Really, really good video by Sarah. You know, so this video was supposed to be me trying to like get into Homestuck. It turned out being more of a less about the plot of Homestuck, but more about the franchise as a whole and its history of it. Because I don't even know what the main plot is itself at the moment. But the starter is 4 kids who accidentally destroyed the universe or something and trying to fix it. But, you know, it's become a bit of what it became, you know, what we saw. But it was super interesting. It seems like it's not a great one to, or not, I don't say great one. It's tough to get into in 2026, you know, as this video title suggests. But you know, I'm more than open to watching a lore video or two about it, you know, a summary video. So if you want to see that, please do like, comment down below. And just thank you for sticking around. It's 2 hours and like 30 something minutes. I appreciate you being part of my Stranger to the World, each and every one of you. And if you enjoy this content, please do like, comment, and subscribe. We're trying our best to hit 2K. But I can't wait to read what you guys think down below. And I'll catch you in the next video or in the Discord. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye now.